Hey there and welcome back. If you are settling in right now, maybe drawing the covers up a little, maybe feeling the day finally loosen its hold on you, then good, because tonight asks almost nothing of you. It asks only that you lie still, that the room stay quiet, and that you let your mind drift out and away back across the better part of 2 centuries and out onto the open sea, to the deck of a vessel that is about to make one of the loveliest journeys there is. We are going to sail north together, you and I, up the whole western edge of Britain, from the soft green coast of the south all the way to the sea lochs of the Scottish Highlands. It is a voyage of many days, days of open water and changing light and slowly unfolding coast, and aboard the ship that carries us there is a family you may think you know, though you have never seen them like this. A queen who is not yet the grieving figure that history would remember, her husband still beside her and well, and their children all about them, going north by sea to the country they love best in the world, in what none of them yet knew were the last untroubled summers of their lives. Before we cast off, I would love to know where in the world you are listening from tonight, and what the hour is where you are, whether it is late and dark already, or whether the light is only beginning to go. I do read what you leave, and I find there is something fitting in a whole scattering of distant rooms all setting out together on the same quiet voyage. If these journeys into other times are something you would like to find your way back to, you are welcome to come along and subscribe, and then the next one will simply be waiting for you whenever you have need of it. That is all I will ask. Now let the room go quiet, and let the lines be cast off, and come with me out onto the water. Picture this: a morning early in the season, on the south coast of England, with a light haze lying over a calm grey sea, and the promise of sun behind it. At anchor in the sheltered water lies a yacht unlike any other in those parts. 3 tall masts, a black hull with a fine line of gold running her whole length, 2 huge curved paddle boxes at her sides, and at her stern the white ensign of the Royal Navy hanging in the still air. She is the Royal Yacht, and this morning she is taking Queen Victoria and her family to sea. There is a quiet, ordered bustle about her, boats coming and going, the last of the baggage swayed aboard, smoke beginning to rise from her 2 funnels as the furnaces are lit and the steam is raised. And somewhere within her, in rooms as fine as any drawing room ashore, the family is settling in for the days at sea ahead, while ahead of them, beyond the haze, beyond the horizon, lies the whole long sweep of the western coast, and at the end of it, the hills of home. Come closer first, before we sail, and take the measure of the ship that is to be our home for these days at sea, because she repays an unhurried and careful eye. Seen from the water, she is larger than she seems from the shore, 300 feet and more from her stem to her stern, a deal of steamer to find lying so quietly at her anchor in the morning haze. Her hull is black, and not merely painted black, but worked and polished, gone over by the patient hands of her crew until it holds a deep dark sheen, and along the sweep of it, just below the rail, runs that single fine line of gold leaf that catches the light and carries it the length of her in one thin, unbroken thread. Her 3 masts rise tall and bare against the pale sky, their sails harboured and snug down along the yards, for she will make this passage under steam and will have little need of canvas. Between the masts stand her 2 funnels, and from them now the first smoke rises and thickens as the fires are fed below. But it is her sides that mark her out as a creature of one particular moment in the history of ships. For there, port and starboard both, rise the 2 enormous paddle boxes, great curving housings, each one taller than a standing man, each shaped like the upper arc of a wheel, because that is exactly what each of them shelters. She is a paddle steamer, built in those few decades when the screw propeller had not yet quite won its slow, stubborn argument against the older paddle wheel, and when she is underway, it is these two wheels, one beating to either side of her, that thrash the water white and drive her north at around 15 knots. And 15 knots is a speed that still seems near to magic to most of the people then alive, who could remember when the only road north was a hard week of jolting carriages over villainous roads. This ship swallows that distance whole in a handful of days. She is, in her own way, as much a wonder of the restless inventive age as the spreading railways and the singing telegraph wires, one more proof that the world itself is shrinking, that the far places are being drawn in close. She is, in plain truth, two things at one and the same time, and that doubleness is the key to everything we shall see in these days, so let us be clear about it before we sail. She is first a yacht, a floating royal residence, fitted out below with private apartments as fine as the drawing rooms of any grand house in London, built and furnished for the single purpose of carrying a queen and her family in comfort, in safety, and above all in a degree of privacy that they can find almost nowhere else on earth. But she is, at the very same time, and in the very same timbers, a craft of the Royal Navy commanded by a serving captain, manned by naval officers and naval seamen, run to naval time by the strokes of a bell and to naval discipline by long custom, and flying at her stern that same white ensign that flies over the grey fighting fleet. Every part of her is a marriage of those two worlds. The deep carpet over the holly-stoned plank, the chintz sofa within a few feet of the cutlass in its rack, the family at their dinner, and the scarlet marine standing motionless at the door. The two lie everywhere close aboard her, divided often by no more than the thickness of a deck, and in these days we shall move quietly between them, again and again. Now the hour to sail draws near, and there is a particular pleasure in watching a great vessel make ready to leave the land. The last boat returns from the shore, and is hoisted to its davits. The pilot comes aboard. Word is passed along the deck, quietly, for there is no shouting on a ship so well run as this one. The orders move from mouth to mouth like water finding its level. Below, the engineers watch the steam climb in the gauges. On deck the seamen stand ready at the capstan, and at a word they throw their weight upon the bars, and the heavy anchor cable comes home link by link, dripping, the men walking round and round, the pawls clicking, until the anchor breaks free of the bottom far below and is catted and secured. And then with a deep tremor that runs through the whole hull, the paddle wheels begin to turn slowly at first, a single ponderous revolution, then another, then settling into their steady beat, and the yacht gathers way, and the green water begins to slide past her sides, and the land begins, almost imperceptibly at the first, to fall astern. We are at sea. The first hours of a voyage have a quality all their own, and I should like you to feel it. There is a settling, a finding of the rhythm, as the ship and all aboard her shake down into the life they will keep for the days ahead. The motion comes into the deck underfoot gentle this morning, on so calm a sea, only the slow, easy lift and fall of a steamer, moving over a low swell, a motion that the body learns within an hour, and then ceases to notice, except as a kind of cradling. The land draws slowly away on the beam. The green hills of the south coast, the white chalk where the cliffs come down to the sea, a church tower among trees, a fishing village in a fold of the shore, growing smaller, growing fainter, sinking at last into the haze of distance, until there is only the sea, and the ship, and the pale sky, and the long wake unrolling white and straight behind her. There is something in that first loss of the land that the heart feels every time, a small letting go, a setting out, and there is a peace in it too, for the cares of the shore cannot follow a vessel out onto the open water, and for these few days the family aboard her are as free of the world as they will ever be. Let us go below now, down out of the morning light, and into the heart of the ship, because it is below decks that the yacht keeps her real surprise. You might expect, climbing down a steep naval companionway into the body of a man of war, to come at once into the bare, hard-painted world of a fighting vessel, iron and white paint and scrubbed plank, the sharp working smells of tar and bilge and oil, and in the working parts of her, forward and below, that is very nearly what you would find. But move aft, past the working ship, through a door and a curtain, and you step quite suddenly into something altogether different, into a place that could almost be a comfortable house in Mayfair, lifted whole and set down inside an iron hull. Underfoot, where you braced for scrubbed deck, there is carpet, deep and soft and quiet, swallowing the sound of your tread. Around you, where you expected bare iron, there is mahogany, warm and glowing, worked everywhere with the quiet ingenuity of fine shipboard joinery, so that every cupboard and drawer and fold-down writing slope is fitted to lock and stow and ride out the worst of a seaway without spilling so much as a dropped pen. The chairs are deep and softly upholstered. The sofas are covered in flowered chintz of the kind one might find in any pleasant country drawing-room. There are framed prints and watercolours screwed level to the panelled walls, and books held safe behind little rails in their fitted shelves, and on the tables the small personal clutter of a family that has made this floating place its own. A workbox, a child's toy, a pair of spectacles on an opened letter, a bowl of flowers. It is all so domestic, so unlike a warship, that the iron hull around it comes to seem a kind of secret kept, a rough dark shell built close around this soft and lamplit interior, the way a plain stone might be built around a jewelled box. And that in the end is nearly what the yacht is. A hard naval shell built around the softest and most carefully guarded thing in the kingdom, the private domestic life of its sovereign, a life that almost none of her millions of subjects ever sees, and that you and I are being quietly allowed to move through, from room to room, as the ship carries us north. The warmest of these rooms is the Queen's own sitting room, and even at sea, even by day, it keeps its air of stillness. There is the writing table with the journal lying upon it that she will fill before she sleeps tonight, as she has filled one nearly every night of her life since she was a girl of 13. There are the broad square windows, for a yacht has true windows, not the mean scuttles of a fighting steamer, and through them now, instead of a darkening loch, there is the bright moving sea, the horizon lifting and falling a little with the motion, the light off the water shifting on the panelled deckhead overhead. There is the faint pleasant smell of the room, compounded of beeswax and the flowers, and threading through it as it threads through every wooden steamer, the clean salt bite of the sea. It is a room built for quiet occupation, for the keeping of journals and the writing of letters and the long patient hours of a woman who, for all her power, spends a large part of her life simply waiting, and at sea, with the cares of the shore left far astern, it is quieter still. Around these private rooms lies the invisible establishment that makes them possible, the household, the court in miniature that travels everywhere with the Queen. For she does not travel alone, nor anything close to it. There are the ladies in waiting who attend her person and her conversation, the maids of honour, younger and more lightly employed, the dressers and wardrobe maids whose whole care is her clothes, the pages and footmen who wait at table and carry messages, the equerries and grooms in waiting who manage the practical business of the court. The prince has his gentlemen, the children have their governesses and nurses and nursery maids. There are physicians aboard, and clerks for the dispatches that pursue the queen even here, and beneath them all a quiet army of upper and under servants, whose single purpose is to see that wherever the queen sets herself down a Highland loch, a German spar, the deck of a ship at sea, the smooth machinery of her daily life goes on turning exactly as it turns at Windsor. At sea that machinery runs at its quietest and most domestic. The public business is set aside, the boxes of state papers closed, and what remains is the simplest work in the world, the getting of a family fed and warmed and comfortable through the days of the passage. And threaded all through and around that soft domestic world is the other one, the ship's own, the Navy's. She is worked by some 240 officers and men, and they are a presence you feel everywhere aboard her, even when you cannot see them. There are the officers in their dark blue and gold who keep the watches and command the working of the vessel, and over them the captain, a senior and carefully chosen man. For the command of the sovereign's own yacht is a signal mark of favour in the service, and also one of its most delicate trials, since the man who holds it must run a taut, smart, faultlessly seaman-like ship, while never once intruding upon the private family whose floating home she also is. Below the officers are the seamen who handle the boats and keep the brasswork blazing and the decks scrubbed white, the engineers and stokers who labour in the heat of the engine room, the cooks and the stewards, and the scarlet marines who stand sentry at the doors of the royal apartments through every hour of the day and night. Two worlds sharing one hull, the family above and within, all ease and lamplight, the navy around and below, all discipline and watchfulness, and each in its own way bent the whole day long upon the same end, the safety and the comfort and the privacy of the family at the heart of it all. The first day at sea unrolls slowly, in the way that days at sea do, measured out not by the clock so much as by the light and the watches and the small unchanging rituals of the yacht. By the middle of the morning the land is gone, and there is only the wide circle of the sea around, grey-green and gently heaving, with the wake unrolling straight behind, and the smoke streaming flat from the funnels, and the steady beat of the wheels going on and on beneath everything, so constant that within an hour the ear stops hearing it and only feels it, a pulse in the timbers. The sun burns slowly through the morning haze, and the sea brightens under it, and here and there the surface is dimpled by the touch of a light air, or darkened by the shadow of a cloud, or broken far off by the dark fin of a passing porpoise rolling at the surface. A few seabirds follow the ship for a while, gulls and gannets, hanging in the air over the wake, watching for whatever the galley throws over. Then they tire of her, and fall away astern, and there is only the empty sea again. For the family, a day at sea is a rare and a welcome kind of idleness. The crushing weight of the southern life, the ministers, the dispatches, the audiences, the unending ceremony cannot reach them here. The boxes of papers are closed. There is for once almost nothing that must be done, and so they do the small pleasant things that people do at sea. The children are brought up on deck, well wrapped against the air, and they watch the sea and the birds and the working of the steamer with the tireless attention of the young. But the chosen ones are set to their lessons for a part of the day. For the prince believes in education with a thorough German seriousness, and will not let a sea voyage interrupt the schooling of a future king and queen, but the lessons are shorter at sea, and there is time besides for play. The Queen sits on deck when the weather is fine, with a book or her sketching or her work, watching her children, watching the sea, content in a way that she is rarely allowed to be. And the prince is happiest of all, for he loves the sea and the air and the science of the ship, and he is forever wanting to know how everything works, climbing to the bridge to watch the navigation, going below to see the engines, asking the officers their endless questions, drinking it all in with the restless, curious energy he brings to everything. He is worth pausing over, the prince, for in these years he is at his best and most at home. The prince consort is not quite 40, a tall man, fair, already a little stooped and a little worn, with the beginnings of a careworn heaviness about the eyes that those who love him have started, without admitting it, to notice. By day, at home, he carries a burden of work that would break a lesser man. He is the true working partner of the monarchy, drafting his endless careful memoranda, reforming the army, planning museums and exhibitions, designing every gable of the new house at Balmoral, reading and advising upon every question of state that crosses his wife's desk, sparing himself nothing, resting almost never. But here at sea, on the way north, much of that weight visibly lifts from him. He stands at the rail with the wind in his face and the open water all around, and the deep lines of his face ease. The sea gives him something England rarely does, a kind of freedom, a release from the relentless round of duty, and the north toward which the craft is steaming gives him more, for the Highlands are the nearest thing he has found to the wooded German uplands of the boyhood he gave up to marry an English queen. He is going home in a sense, though it is not his home, and the going lightens him. And the Queen beside him is happy this summer for reasons she could number on her fingers. She is happy because she is going north to Scotland, which she loves past all reason. She is happy because her husband is beside her, and, to all appearance, well. She is happy because the weight of London lies far astern. The years just behind her have been crowded and hard, child after child, crisis of state after crisis of state, and lately the long anxious strain of a war in the Crimea, only just ended, that cost her many a sleepless night for her soldiers in the cold and the mud. And the years just ahead of her, though she has not the smallest reason to suspect it, will prove to be the last of precisely this contentment, the last in which the man at the rail beside her will stand there alive, the last in which the family will be whole, the last before the word grief comes to mean what it will one day come to mean for her. But none of that shadow has fallen. This summer she is simply a wife and a mother, going north by sea with her family, in a happiness she will spend the whole long remainder of her life trying to call back, and never quite be able to. As the first day draws toward its evening, the light begins to change over the water in the lovely lingering way that sea light does. The sun westers and the sea goes from grey-green to a deeper blue, and then to a burnished gold along the path of the sinking sun, a road of light laid across the water straight to the ship. The air cools. The wind, such as it is, drops with the day. The swell smooths and quiets. And as the colour drains from the west, the first lamps are lit aboard one by one, blooming warm and yellow along her length, so that the vessel becomes a small island of light moving over the darkening sea. Below, the table is being laid for dinner. The smell of the cooking drifts up from the galley. The family gathers as families do at the end of a day. And out beyond the rail there is only the sea, going dark now, and the first stars coming faint into the eastern sky, and the long road of fading gold in the west, and the steady beat of the wheels carrying them on through the gathering night toward the north. The dinner aboard at sea is a quieter, homelier affair than the grand banquets of the south, and it is the better for it. The Royal Dining Saloon is a handsome panelled room, carpeted, lit by lamps that throw an even and unwavering glow, with the dark sea showing now at the windows. The cloth is laid white and smooth. The Queen's own silver, carried aboard for the voyage, is burnished to a soft shine. The cut glasses catch the lamplight. There are flowers on the table, brought aboard at the last port. The footmen move around it with the noiseless precision of men who have set this table 1,000 times, balancing each dish against the gentle live motion of the ship, and it is a quiet marvel to watch them work, for no matter how the deck lifts and settles beneath them, not a glass is spilled, not a plate slides. To cook such a dinner at sea is to solve a string of small impossibilities in a galley scarcely larger than a pantry, with only the stores that were loaded at the last port. And yet the dishes come up looking and smelling and tasting as though they had been sent up from the kitchens of a great house on dry land. It is comfort raised nearly to an art, a way of carrying home with you out onto the open water. The family comes to table, and the talk is the easy wandering talk of people at the end of a day, with nothing pressing to do. They speak of the porpoises seen at noon, of the birds that followed the yacht, of where they will be tomorrow. Some small private joke goes round, and sets even the Queen laughing in the open unguarded way her solemn subjects would scarcely know. The Prince draws the older children out and listens to their answers. He teases the younger ones. He turns the talk, as he cannot help doing, to the sea and the steamer and the coast they are passing, for he can never quite stop teaching. And what would strike you, sitting unseen in the corner, is how little of majesty there is in any of it, and how much of plain domestic warmth. The small woman at the head of the table is the most powerful sovereign on earth. The man beside her helps to steer the policy of nations. The bright girl down the table will be an empress within a lifetime. But none of that is in the room tonight. In the room tonight there is only a family at dinner at sea, glad of one another, in no hurry to be anywhere else. After dinner there is music, as there nearly always is, and it is one of the gentlest pleasures of these evenings. The Queen and the Prince are both genuinely musical, not in the idle dabbling way expected of their rank, but seriously, with real skill and a real love of the art. There is a piano aboard, braced and secured against the ship's movement, and after dinner it is most often the Prince who sits down to it. He plays well, with feeling and discipline both, and he sings, and the Queen sings too, in a true sweet voice that was schooled in her girlhood by the finest masters in Europe. Sometimes they sing together the old German songs of Albert's boyhood, the airs they have loved since their courtship, the simple melodies that mean more to them than any grand performance could. The older children gather to listen and join the songs they know. The lamplight is warm on the keys and on the faces around the piano. And outside, beyond the glass, the dark sea slides by, and the music goes out faintly over the water and is lost in the deep quiet of the night and the steady beat of the wheels. And then, when the music has died away and the children have been carried down to their beds, the ship settles into her first night at sea, and a vessel at night under way is one of the most soothing places in all the world to lie. For the motion that the body learned and forgot in the morning comes into its own in the dark. The easy lift and fall, the gentle roll, the long rhythm of the ship moving over the swell, rocking the whole vessel and everyone in her the way a cradle rocks a child. In the cabins the lamps are turned down low and then out. The family sleeps, the household sleeps, and the great vessel carries them on through the dark, her wheels beating their steady pulse, her wake unrolling pale behind her, her riding lights burning. the watch keeping the deck above the sleepers. There is the soft rush of the water along the hull, the faint working creak of the timbers, the distant muffled beat of the engines, the striking of the bell marking the half hours of the night, and under all of it, the vast silence of the open sea, into which all these small sounds fall and are swallowed. It asks nothing of the sleeper but that he let it carry him down. Let it carry you down now, the way it carried them. Let the ship rock you, and the wheels beat their patient pulse, and the dark sea slide by, and sleep, while she sails north through the night. The dawn of the second day comes early and slow over the open sea, for at this season and in these latitudes the nights are short. The sky in the east pales and softens and warms. The stars go out one by one. The sea, which was black all night, takes colour again. First a cold grey, then a luminous pale gold along the eastern horizon where the sun will rise. The yacht has run on through the dark, and the land that was lost yesterday in the south is far behind now. She is out in the wider water, crossing toward the west, with the coast of England, a low blue line away to starboard, and in time the faint blue suggestion of another coast Wales, and beyond it, Ireland rising ahead and to port. The morning watch holystones the decks and polishes the brass. The smoke begins again to thicken from the funnels as the fires are fed. The smell of breakfast rises from the galley. And slowly, room by room, the ship wakes, the children first always, and their nurses, then the household, then the family, until the whole floating village is astir again, and the second day of the passage is begun. The second day takes the steamer up through the Irish Sea, and it is a day of wider water and bigger sky, with the land never quite out of sight but always distant, a blue coast to starboard, a fainter one to port, and between them the broad grey-green channel up which the ship steams steadily north. The Isle of Man rises ahead in the forenoon, a hump of blue hill on the horizon, and draws slowly abeam through the afternoon, and falls away astern by evening, and all day there is the traffic of the sea to watch. For these are busy waters, a fishing fleet working off a headland, their brown sails leaning all one way, a collier brig butting south under a press of canvas, a paddle steamer like their own but plainer, carrying goods or passengers between the ports, that dips her flag to the royal yacht as she passes, and is answered courteously by the officer of the watch. The sea itself is alive with small things if you watch for them, the porpoises that come to play in the bow wave, rolling and blowing and keeping pace with the steamer for a while before they tire and sheer away, the gannets that fold their wings and fall like thrown spears into the water after fish, the drifting rafts of seabirds that scatter, complaining, as the ship comes through. Let us spend a while with the children, for a vessel carrying the royal nursery is a particular and touching kind of floating household, and the children are half the life of the voyage. There are a good many of them by this summer, a descending stair of them, from the nearly grown down to the barely walking. The eldest is the Princess Royal, very nearly a woman now, clever and serious and thoughtful, already promised in marriage and soon to be carried away to Prussia, to a court and a country not her own. The parting, when it comes, will cost her watching mother dear. After her comes the Prince of Wales, the boy on whom so much anxious hope, and already and unfairly, so much paternal disappointment is being heaped. And after him the line of the younger ones, brothers and sisters descending by steps and stages down to the littlest, who is hardly out of arms and travels in the warm care of his nurses. At sea they are in their element. The deck is the finest playground they have ever known, full of ropes and capstans and mysterious gear, full of kindly weathered sailors who touch their caps and answer their questions, full of the endless fascination of the sea. They are watched, always, by the hovering nurses and by the indulgent eyes of the crew. But they are freer here than almost anywhere, and they know it, and they love the yacht for it. And there is a daily rhythm to the ship that the children quickly learn and come to love, for a well-run steamer lives by its routine. There is the striking of the bell every half hour that marks out the watches and tells the time to all aboard. There is the changing of the watch, the men coming up and the men going down, the brief muster, the handing over. There is the holystoning of the decks in the early morning, the sailors on their knees with the soft sandstone blocks scrubbing the planks white. There is the polishing of the endless brass, the coiling down of ropes, the constant small maintenance that a ship demands. There is the cook's routine, and the steward's and the surgeon's morning rounds. There is the noon observation, when the officers come on deck with their sextants to take the sun and fix the ship's position, a small daily ceremony of science on which the whole safety of the voyage depends. And there are the meals for everyone aboard, family and household and crew, that punctuate the day and give it shape. To a child, all of this is endlessly interesting. To the family, it is a soothing framework, a sense of order and competence surrounding them, so that they may be idle in the midst of purpose. A great craft is never alone, but carries a whole small fleet of lesser vessel upon her decks and at her davits, and they are the threads that tie her to the shore. There is the captain's gig, slim and fast and beautifully kept. There are the heavier launches and cutters for stores and water and people. There is the elegant little barge kept for the Queen's own use, manned by a picked crew, in which she is rowed ashore when she chooses to land, the oars rising and falling together in a single disciplined sweep. When the ship lies at anchor, these boats ply back and forth to the shore, and each crossing is a small voyage of its own. When she is under way, they lie quiet at the davits, ready. To watch the lowering of a boat is to watch a piece of fine seamanship. The falls eased together, the boat dropping smoothly down the ship's side, touching the water, the crew tumbling in, casting off, bending to their oars. It is the kind of skill that looks easy only because it is done by men who have done it 10,000 times, and it is everywhere aboard this vessel, the quiet competence of people who are very good at a difficult thing. By the evening of the second day, the ship is well up the Irish Sea, and the character of the voyage begins to change, for ahead lies the turn round the north of Ireland and the long arm of the Mull of Kintyre, beyond which lie the sheltered waters and the islands of the Scottish west. The coasts draw in a little. The water takes on the look of the north, greyer and clearer and colder. The light lasts longer into the evening, for they are running steadily into higher latitudes where the summer nights grow short and pale. And as the second dusk comes down, the same gentle ceremony repeats, the westering sun, the gold road on the water, the cooling air, the lamps blooming one by one along the yacht, the table being laid, the family gathering. But there is a new thing in the air this evening, a sense of approach, of the north drawing near, and the talk at dinner turns more and more to Scotland, and to the hills, and to the house on the Dee that waits for them at the end of the road. The second night at sea is much like the first, but the sleeper by now is wholly used to the ship and sinks into her rhythm without a thought. The motion is a familiar friend. The sounds are known and welcome. The body has learned the lift and fall and no longer notices it except as comfort. The family sleeps, the household sleeps, the watch keeps the deck, the wheels beat on through the short, pale northern night, and somewhere in the small hours while they sleep, the steamer rounds the north of Ireland and turns her head toward the east of north, toward the long arm of the Mull of Kintyre, and the water beneath her changes its character. For here the open Atlantic comes in at last from the west, and the ship begins to feel the long swell of the open ocean. It is nothing to alarm. The sea is kind tonight. The glass stands high, but it is a different motion, a longer and a deeper one. The steamer lifting slowly to each great smooth hill of water and settling again into the trough beyond, a slow and majestic rhythm, like the breathing of something vast and asleep. Those who wake to it feel only that the vessel has begun to move more grandly, and then they sleep again, rocked deeper by the long ocean swell, and the ship carries them on round the Mull and into the north. By the dawn of the third day the worst of the open water is behind, and the yacht has come into the sheltered seas of the Scottish west, and here the voyage becomes, if anything, lovelier still, for this is a coast like no other. Ahead and around, as the morning light grows, the islands begin to rise from the sea, blue at first, far off, mere suggestions of land on the brightening horizon, then nearer taking shape, becoming hills and headlands and the dark green of their lower slopes. Then near at hand, the ship threading between them up sounds and channels of sheltered water, so that there is land on either hand, close enough to see the white cottages and the grazing sheep and the smoke of the crofts. The water here is calm again, sheltered by the islands from the ocean swell, and clear and cold and dark, and the steamer moves through it quietly, her wheels turning slow, her wake spreading wide and smooth behind her. It is a world of blue water and green island and grey rock, of sea locks opening and closing as she passes their mouths, of small boats putting out to wave at the royal yacht as she goes by, of an ancient wild beauty that grows with every mile she steams to the north. It is worth asking what it was about this hard old northern country that took such a hold upon the two people aboard, for their love of Scotland was no passing fashion but one of the deepest currents of their lives. Partly it was the plain physical relief of it, the cool reviving air, the freedom to walk and ride and breathe, the escape from the heat and the crowds and the ceremony of the south. Partly, for the prince especially, it was that aching likeness to the lost Germany of his boyhood. But it was something larger than either, something that belonged to the age as much as to the two of them. For this was the era in which educated romantic Britain was falling in love with the Highlands, with the romance and the poetry of them, with the wild grandeur that an earlier century had found merely frightening, and that this one had learned, through the novels of Walter Scott and the brush of 100 painters, and the gathered songs and legends, to find sublime. Victoria and Albert were of their time in this as in so much. They came north already half in love with an idea of Scotland, and found that the reality more than answered the idea, and so they came back year after year and bought their land, and built their house, and made the Highlands the private heart of a life lived otherwise relentlessly in public. And out of that love had grown the house toward which the whole voyage leans Balmoral on the River Dee in the granite country to the east, taken first on a lease, and then loving it more each year, bought outright, land and all. There, only lately finished in these very years, stood a new house raised on the site of the old, a castle of pale local granite in the Scottish baronial style, all turrets and crow-stepped gables and tall windows looking out at the hills, a house the prince himself had helped to design down to the smallest detail, from the drains to the tartan carpets, pouring into it all the restless, thorough improving energy he brought to everything. Balmoral was to be the true and private heart of their lives, the one home wholly theirs, untouched by the cold ceremonial hand of the older palaces, and the thought of it drew them north each year like a lodestone. It is to Balmoral, in the end, that this ship is bound. The long sea passage is only the first and pleasantest stage of the road that leads to that granite house among the eastern hills, where the rest of the Highland summer waits for them. The walks, the sketching, the stalking, the quiet domestic happiness, the whole brief annual season of being, very nearly, a private family in a private place. Let us stay with the third day a while, for the passage through the islands is the loveliest sailing in all of Britain, and it deserves a slow and lingering eye. The craft moves up the sheltered sounds at an easy pace, and on either hand the land slides by close enough to read, a white croft with its strip of green field and its few sheep, a ruined chapel on a headland, grey stone among the bracken, a little stone jetty where a fishing boat lies hauled up, a wisp of peat smoke rising straight from a chimney into the still morning air. The hills rise behind the shores, green and brown and purple, with the heather not yet in full bloom, their tops bare rock, their flanks seamed with the white threads of burns coming down after rain. The light is the changing northern light, never quite the same from 1 hour to the next. Now a clear bright sun laying the islands out sharp and coloured, now a soft haze drawing a veil over the farther hills, now the shadow of a cloud moving across a green slope like a hand passed over it, now a shaft of sun breaking through to light one island brilliantly while its neighbours stay in shade. It is a light that painters have chased for 2 centuries and never quite caught, and it plays all day over the islands as the ship goes by. There are seals on the rocks. If you watch for them, grey shapes hauled out on a skerry, lifting their heads to watch the vessel pass, sliding off into the water as she comes near. There are seabirds in their thousands on the cliffs of the larger islands, wheeling and crying, the air below their ledges thick with them. There are the high hills of the mainland rising blue and remote beyond the nearer islands, range behind range, fading into the distance and the haze. And there is, over all of it, the deep stillness of a country with few people in it, a hush that the steady beat of the ship's wheels does not break so much as measure, a calm into which the cry of a gull or the bleat of a sheep on the shore falls clear and far. The family is on deck for most of the day, watching it all go by, the children pointing at the seals and the birds, the prince naming the islands and the hills, the queen sketching, all of them held in the unfolding beauty of the passage. It is the kind of day one remembers for a lifetime, and they will. Toward the evening of the third day the ship turns in toward the land and comes to her first anchorage in the islands, a sheltered bay or the mouth of a sea loch, ringed with hills, where she can lie safe and still for the night. The approach to an anchorage is a piece of fine seamanship, done quietly and without fuss. The yacht slows, the wheels turning slower and slower, the way coming off her. The lidsman in the chain swings his lead and calls the depth in the old chant of the sea. The officers con her in, watching the marks on the shore, the captain giving his low orders. And then, at a chosen spot, the engines stop, and there is a moment of profound silence after the days of their steady beat, and then the order to let go, and the great anchor plunges down with a roar of running cable, and the steamer swings slowly to her cable and comes to rest. The silence that follows is the silence of the land returning, the cry of birds on the shore, the lap of water, the wind in the hill grasses, all the small sounds that the ship's own noise had hidden for 2 days, coming back now to fill the quiet, and the bay in which she lies is a place of deep peace. The hills rise close around it, green and dark in the evening light, their tops catching the last of the sun. The water is still, sheltered from the open sea, dark and clear, holding the hills upside down in it. A few crofts show on the shore, their windows beginning to glow as the evening comes down. A boat or two lies at moorings. A thread of smoke rises here and there. The air carries the smell of the land, the salt of the tide line, the green resinous breath of bracken and birch, the sweet smell of peat smoke that to the people aboard has become one of the best loved smells in the world, the smell of the north, of escape, of the holiday beginning. The ship lies in the midst of it, a small island of warmth and light and human company set down in all that wild and ancient country, riding easy at her anchor as the night comes down, and the family, gathered below for their dinner, can feel the peace of the place around them, the deep quiet of the hills, the stillness of the sheltered water, the sense of having come, at last, very near to home. The dinner at anchor that first evening in the islands has a particular sweetness, for it is the first taken in true stillness after 2 days of the moving sea, and the stillness itself feels like a gift. The table is laid as it always is, white and smooth and exact, the silver shining, the cut glasses catching the lamplight, the flowers down the centre. But tonight the deck does not lift and settle beneath the footman's feet, and the lamp flames stand straight and unwavering, and there is a settledness, a repose that the sea cannot give. The family comes to table. Grace is said into the quiet. The talk runs easy and glad. They have come through the open water. They are in the islands now. The north is all around them, and there is in the room a contentment deeper than any single day could account for, the contentment of people very near to the place they love most, with the hardest part of the journey behind and only the gentlest part ahead. Told, and what would strike you, sitting unseen in the corner of that still room, is the same thing that strikes you every evening of this voyage, how little of majesty there is in it, and how much of plain human warmth. Yes, the small woman at the head of the table is the most powerful sovereign on earth. Yes, the careworn man beside her helps to shape the policy of nations. Yes, the bright, serious girl down the table will be an empress within a lifetime, and the mother of an emperor after that. But not one shred of that is in the room tonight. In the room tonight there is only a family at dinner in a quiet bay among the hills, glad of one another's company, glad of the still water and the good food and the deep peace of the place, in no hurry to be anywhere else in the world. It is the kind of evening that families have always had and almost never remember, because nothing happens in it worth the remembering. And yet it is exactly these unremarkable evenings, looked back upon from the far side of some grievous loss, that come to seem the most golden and the most irrecoverable hours of a whole life. We are watching one of them now, while it is still ordinary, while it is still safe, while no one in that hushed room has any reason to think it anything but one more good evening among the many yet to come. After dinner, and as ever, there is music, and tonight the music carries differently, for the vessel is still, and the bay is still, and the sound goes out clear across the quiet water. The prince is at the piano, playing the old German songs of his boyhood. The queen sings with him in her true sweet voice. The older children gather to listen, and lend their voices to the airs they know. The lamplight is warm on the keys, and on the bent fair head of the prince, and on the faces ringed around the instrument. And outside, beyond the glass, the bay is dark and still, and the music drifts out over the water, so that a crofter on the far shore, banking down his fire for the night, might catch across the stillness the thread of a voice singing some half-known tune, and pause a moment in the dark and wonder at the strangeness and the beauty of it. Music here in this empty place, drifting out from the lit ship on the dark water like a sound from another and a kinder world. When the music has died away and the youngest children have been carried down to their beds, a few of the household climb up for a turn on deck before the night closes in, and the deck after dark in a Highland anchorage is a place of rare beauty and deep peace. The working bustle of the day is gone. The vessel has settled into her night routine. The paddle boxes loom dark against a sky that, as the brief northern night deepens, fills slowly with stars. For the sky here, far from the smoke and glare of any town, is a thing a child of the cities can scarcely believe. Not the dim scatter of a town sky, but the true firmament, crowded edge to edge, the pale river of the Milky Way flung clear across it, the whole turning wheel of heaven turning silent and serene overhead. A clean, sharp cold comes up off the dark water, now that the sun is gone, and the air is so still that the smallest sounds carry far, the lap of water along the hull, the creak of a rope taking the strain as the ship swings at her cable, the cry of a night bird on the invisible hill. The ship's lamps make a warm pool of light about her, but step to the rail and look outward, into the night, and you are looking into a pure and ancient darkness. The shadowed bay, the dark hills, the blazing sky, and feeling the real size and silence of the country they have come so far to be among. While the household drifts towards sleep, the other yacht, the Navy's, takes up its night, for a vessel at anchor is never truly asleep, and keeps her watch through the night as faithfully as she would at sea. The anchor watch is set, a handful of men who will keep the deck through the night while the rest sleep. Their charge to see that the anchor holds, that no other vessel drifts down on them, that the riding lights burn clear, that all is well. The officer of the watch makes his slow rounds. The scarlet marine sentries stand unmoving at the doors of the royal apartments, relieved at intervals by the soundless changing of the guard. Forward, the off-duty seamen sleep swung in their hammocks, packed close and warm, 200 men breathing slow in the dark. And deep in the belly of her, in the cooling engine room, the fires are banked but not out. A duty stoker keeping them just alive against the morning, the machinery still and patient around him in the red-lit gloom, the iron and the watchfulness lying always beneath all the warmth and the ease, as they always do aboard this double ship. And in her own cabin the Queen sits a last few minutes at her writing table, the single lamp drawn close, and opens the journal that has waited there all evening, and writes the entry of the day in her quick forward-leaning hand, as she has done nearly every night of her life since she was a girl of 13. She writes of the passage through the islands, of the seals and the birds, of the dear children, of the music after dinner, of the beauty of the bay in which they lie. She writes the small, happy, ordinary record of one more good day among her family, with no shadow on it and no foreknowledge in it, only the plain contentment of a woman who is, tonight, exactly where she most wishes to be. Then she closes the book on its clasp and turns down the lamp, and the last light in that part of the steamer goes quietly out, and there is only the dark, and the soft sounds of the hull, and the deep breathing of a sleeping family, carried safe upon the still water of a Highland bay, with the hills keeping their long silence around them, and the watch keeping the ship until the morning. It is worth wondering, too, about the household while the family sleeps, about all those ladies and gentlemen and servants who came north with the Queen, and how they passed the quiet hours aboard. For they have their own evening, their own society of comfort and routine, running in parallel with the family's. In the wardroom, where the officers gather, There is talk over the last of the wine, talk of the day's run, of the passage still ahead, of the steamer and her ways, of news from the south brought up by the last mail. In the cabins of the ladies in waiting there is needlework set aside, and letters being finished by candlelight to go ashore with the morning boat, and the quiet exchange of confidences between women who have spent the day in the careful watchful attendance that their service asks. Below, in the servants' quarters, there is the ease that comes when the day's work is done and the family is settled, the upper servants at their supper, the talk running freer than it ever may above stairs, the small society of the household, with all its own ranks and friendships and rivalries, living out its own evening in the warm lower decks. It is a travelling village of perhaps 100 souls, this household, and it has its own life and its own pleasures going on around and beneath the family it exists to serve. And there is, at the very centre of the ship, the marriage that the whole vessel exists to carry and to shelter, and it is worth a quiet word here in the dark, for it was a true and a deep and a rare thing. They had not been expected at the first to love one another. So royal marriages were matters of state, of alliance and succession, and many were cold arrangements lived out at a careful distance. But this one had become, against the odds of their world, a genuine and a passionate and a working partnership of two minds and two hearts. They worked together over the boxes of state papers. They raised their children together by their own firm shared ideas. They built their houses and planted their gardens and made their music together. He was her chief minister in all but name, and her dearest friend, and the love of her life. She was his anchor and his cause, and the whole reason for the strange transplanted life he led. And the weeks each year in Scotland were, more than any other time, the time when that partnership could simply be a marriage, when the Queen could be a wife, and the Prince a husband, and the two of them be, for a little while, only happy in one another. That is the thing, above all, that this vessel is carrying north, not a sovereign and a consort, but a man and a woman who love each other, going home together to the hills. Listen, now, in the deep quiet of the anchorage, for the yacht at night is never quite silent, and her small sounds are the lullaby of everyone aboard. A soft, endless lap and chuckle of the sea runs along the planking, rising and falling so slightly that it is less a sound than a presence. There is the creak and faint groan of the timbers as she works gently against herself, the way all wooden ships do, talking quietly to themselves through the night. There is now and again the deeper groan of the anchor cable taking up its strain, and the faint answering shiver that runs through the hull as she swings to a new lie. There is the soft tread far off of the watch on deck, and the muffled striking of the bell marking the half hours of the night, that ancient measured sound by which sailors have counted out their watches for centuries. And under all of it, the great silence of the bay and the hills, into which all these small sounds fall and are swallowed, so that they seem only to deepen the quiet rather than to break it. It is a sound world unlike anything ashore, soft and rhythmic and endless, and it asks nothing of the listener but that he let it carry him down towards sleep. Think, too, while the ship lies so still, of the deep age of the place in which she rests, for the bay is older than the mind can easily hold. The hills around it were raised and folded and worn down again across spans of time so vast that the whole of human history is the merest flicker at the end of them. The sea loch itself was carved, in its present shape, by ice, by a vast glacier that flowed slowly down this valley in the cold ages, before there were people in this land at all, grinding and gouging and deepening the rock, and then melting back and letting the sea come flooding in behind it. The stones of the shore have been rolled smooth by 10,000 years of tide. The peat in the bogs above has been laid down an inch in a lifetime since the forests the first people found here were old. To lie at anchor in such a place on such a still night is to rest for a few hours upon the surface of a depth of time, so vast it ought by rights to make the heart quail, and yet it does not, for the night is so quiet and the steamer so safe, and the hills, for all their terrible age, stand so gently around her. There is a comfort, in the end, in being so slight a thing in so old and vast a place. It is a kind of permission to set down, for a night, the whole weight of one's own urgent cares. And out beyond the hull, beyond the small warm circle of the ship's lights, the shore at midnight keeps its own deep watch. The cottage fires that glowed at evening have gone out now, banked and covered, and the crofters are asleep. The shore is dark. The tide which ebbed all evening has turned and begun to flood again, the salt water creeping back up over the smooth stones with a sound too soft to hear. On the dark hills the deer have come down, as they do in the safe hours of the night, to graze the lower ground. An owl is hunting on silent wings along the edge of a birch wood, and far up on the high tops there is only the cold, and the wind that never quite dies even on the stillest night, and the wheeling stars. The whole country lies sleeping, or keeping its own wild night-time wakefulness around the one small anchored ship, and the craft lies sleeping in the midst of it, a thing of warmth and order and human love set down for a night in the heart of all that ancient beauty, and held there gently, safe, until the morning. The dawn of the fourth day comes early over the islands, and the ship wakes to a morning of great beauty. The brief night has passed. The sky pales and warms in the east, the stars go out, and the bay in which she lies takes colour again, the hills greening, the water brightening, the mist that gathered in the night, lifting slowly off the surface in soft white wreaths that the first sun burns away. The morning watch holystones the decks and polishes the brass. The smoke begins to rise again from the funnels as the fires are fed. The smell of breakfast rises from the galley, and room by room the vessel wakes. And then, in due course, the anchor is weighed, the capstan manned, the men walking round, the cable coming home, link by dripping link, the anchor breaking free of the bottom and rising to the cathead, and the wheels begin again their steady beat, and the ship gathers way, and slides out of the quiet bay, and on up the coast, northward toward the end of the road. This last day of the passage is the gentlest of all, for the yacht is in sheltered water now, threading the sounds and channels of the inner coast, and there is no open sea to cross, only the slow unfolding beauty of the islands and the hills sliding by on either hand. Let us spend the day noticing the smaller textures of the ship that the bustle of the voyage has kept us from, for they are part of what makes her a home and not merely a vessel. Consider the lamps, the source of all the warmth we have moved through these evenings. They burn oil drawn up through trimmed wicks behind polished glass, and the tending of them is a vessel of its own, a man going round at dusk and through the night, trimming each wick to its cleanest flame, wiping the soot from the glass, filling the reservoirs, so that should anyone wake and need a light is there, clean and ready. A lamp left untended smokes and dims. A lamp well kept burns clear and gold for hours, and the difference between them is the difference between a steamer that merely floats and a ship that feels like a home. Consider, too, the comforts of the sleeping cabins, for a steamer fitted for a queen is fitted down to the smallest thread. The beds are made up with fine sheets and good blankets, warmed before the family retires. There are basins and ewers of fresh water fitted into gimbaled stands so they cannot spill. There are thick curtains at the windows to keep out the early northern dawn, that the sleepers may rest past the unholy hour at which the summer sun comes up in these latitudes. There are little fitted shelves for a book, a candle, a watch, and bell pulls within reach of the hand should anything be wanted in the night. Every comfort that ingenuity could devise and money provide has been thought of and supplied, and yet none of it is showy. It is the quiet, thorough comfort of people who have never had to think about comfort, because it has always simply been there, arranged by unseen hands before they knew they wanted it. And consider the food waiting in the cool of the storerooms, for a vessel victualled for such a voyage carries a rich abundance below her waterline. There are barrels of flour and oatmeal, there are hams and cheeses and preserved meats, there are the fresh stores taken aboard at the last port, the eggs and the milk and the green things carefully kept. There is tea and coffee and sugar. There is wine and spirits under the steward's lock and key. The children will have their porridge in the morning, and their bread and honey, the family their proper breakfast, the crew their hearty plain rations. All of it is stored and counted and managed by men whose whole art is to see that a floating community of 350 souls, family and household and crew together, is fed well and fed regularly however far from land they sail. It is a quiet marvel of organisation, hidden away below, and it asks nothing of the sleepers above but that they wake hungry. There is something worth saying, too, about the simple safety of it all, about how rare and precious a thing it was in that century to travel so far in such peace, for travel in those days was not the easy matter it would later become. The roads were hard and the inns were rough, the seas were dangerous and ships were lost, illness struck travellers far from help. The journey itself was, for most people, a thing to be endured rather than enjoyed. And yet here, aboard this ship, travel had been transformed into something else entirely, into a sort of moving home, safe and warm and provisioned and crewed, that carried its passengers through the dangerous world as a shell carries the soft creature within it. The family aboard could not have crossed their own park, in the ordinary way of things, without an escort and a fuss, and yet here they were, 300 miles from home, on the open coast of the wild north, as safe and easy as in their own beds at Windsor. That safety, too, is a kind of luxury, perhaps the deepest of all, and it is one we have lost the knack of noticing, who travel now without a thought. But to them, and to their age, it was a wonder still fresh enough to be felt. It is worth holding, gently, the thought of the children's futures as they play on the deck in the morning sun, not as a sadness, for there is no sadness in this voyage, but as a kind of tenderness toward them. The serious, clever eldest girl, the Princess Royal, will go to Prussia, as we have said, and will be happy and unhappy there by turns, and will be the mother of a clever, difficult son. She will write loving letters home across the years, and will be, to her mother, a dear and distant presence for the rest of her life. The boy, the Prince of Wales, so worried over now, will grow into a man his anxious father would scarcely have predicted, and will wait a long while indeed for his crown, and will wear it, when at last it comes to him, with more grace and wisdom than anyone aboard today would dare to hope. The younger ones, the little ones who tumble about the deck under the eyes of the nurses, will scatter across the courts of Europe in their turn, marrying here and there, carrying the blood of this family into half the royal houses of the continent. All of that is folded up today in these playing children. All of it is still to come, unguessed and unwritten, and today they are only children, at play on a yacht in the morning sun, with their mother and father near them, and the whole unknown future still mercifully hidden. It is worth saying what these years were, In the end, in the arc of all their lives, they were the high summer of it. The few years near the middle of the story when everything held, when the marriage was strong and the children were thriving and the work was going well and the houses were being built and the family was unbroken. There is in every life, if one is fortunate, a season like this one, a season that does not announce itself as the best of times, that feels at the time like merely the ordinary middle of things, with always more to come, and that is revealed only afterward, by the hard light of what came later, to have been the very crown and summit of one's happiness. These were those years for the Queen and the Prince. They did not know it. One never does. That is the nature of such years, that they are only known for what they were once they are gone. But we know it, looking back from the far side, and so we may do for them the one thing they could not do for themselves. We may see this voyage for the golden thing it is, and hold it gently, and be glad, on their behalf, that they had it, this passage north through the summer islands, with everything still whole, and nothing yet lost. The day's run wears on, gentle and unhurried, the ship sliding up the sheltered coast through the changing light. In the afternoon the wind freshens a little, and the surface of the Sounds is ruffled and darkened, and small waves slap at the bows, and then it drops again toward evening, and the water smooths, and the steamer moves on through a stillness laid over everything. The hills draw nearer and grander as the ship works north and east toward the mainland coast. The islands fall behind. The high mountains of the Highlands rise blue and remote ahead, range behind range, their tops still streaked here and there with the last of the winter snow in the high corries. There are eagles, perhaps, turning far up over the ridges, mere specks against the sky. There are red deer on the high slopes, if you have the eyes to find them, moving in single file along the skyline. There is, everywhere, the deepening sense of having come into the heart of the country, into the old wild grand interior toward which the whole voyage has been tending. And as this last full day draws toward its evening, the same gentle ceremony comes round again, as it has each evening of the passage, the westering sun, the gold road laid across the water, the cooling air, the lamps blooming one by one along the craft, the table being laid below, the family gathering. But there is a fullness to this evening that the others lacked, a sense of arrival drawing near, for the ship will make her last anchorage tonight, and tomorrow, or the day after, she will land them, and the sea part of the journey will be over, and the road home will run overland through the hills to the Dee. And so the dinner this evening is a glad one, full of the talk of what lies ahead, the house, the hills, the long Highland summer waiting, and the music after it is sweet and unhurried, and the family lingers late over the quiet pleasures of the evening, in no hurry to end the last full night aboard the vessel that has carried them so faithfully so far. Let us go back, now, into the middle days of the passage, and dwell on some of the hours we passed over too lightly, for a voyage of days is made of many small, unrepeatable moments, and the loveliest of them are easy to miss. Consider the early mornings at sea before the family wakes, the grey hour the loveliest of the day, when the watch is changing and the light is just coming. The sea at that hour is the colour of pewter, smooth and cold. The sky pales by imperceptible degrees in the east. The air is sharp and clean, and smells of salt and of the coming day. The decks are wet with dew, and the sailors move about their morning work quietly, holystoning, coiling, polishing, their voices low. A few seabirds wake and begin to follow the ship. The smoke from the funnels stands up dark against the paling sky, and slowly, slowly the light grows and the colour comes back into the world first, the cold gold along the horizon, then the warming of the sea, then the sun itself lifting clear of the water in a path of fire. To stand on deck at that hour before the day's bustle begins is to have the whole wide morning sea to oneself, and it is a thing worth waking for. Consider, too, the sea itself, and all the life that moves in it and over it, for a watchful eye is never bored at sea. There are the porpoises that come to play in the bow wave, 3 or 4 together, rolling and blowing and crossing and recrossing beneath the very stem of the yacht, keeping pace with her effortlessly, seeming to do it for the pure joy of the thing, until they tire of the game and sheer away. There are the big gannets, white with black-tipped wings, that fold and fall like thrown spears into the water after fish, vanishing in a small white splash and bobbing up again a moment later. There are the gulls that follow the ship for the galley scraps, hanging in the air over the wake with hardly a wing beat, riding the wind the steamer makes. There are, far off sometimes, the spouts of whales, or the dark backs of a school of dolphins, or a basking shark lying at the surface in the calm. And there are the smaller things, the drifting jellyfish pulsing slowly past, the floating weed, the strange small creatures that the calm sea brings up to its surface, all the teeming life of the ocean going about its business beneath the keel and around the hull, indifferent to the great vessel passing through. There came on one of the middle days a change in the weather, not a storm, for the voyage was blessed throughout, but a softening and a greying of the bright days that had gone before. The sky clouded over from the west. The sun went in. The sea lost its sparkle and turned a flat, dull grey, and a fine, soft rain came drifting down, the gentle, persistent rain of the western seas, that does not lash or drive but simply falls, hour after hour, veiling the coast and softening every edge. There is a peace in such weather at sea, a drawing in, a coziness. The decks are wet and largely deserted. The family keeps below, in the warm lamplit rooms, with the rain pattering on the skylights and the grey sea sliding past the streaming windows. There are books and games and the children's lessons, and the long, easy hours of a family shut in together with nothing to do but enjoy one another. The ship steams on through the soft rain, her wheels beating steadily, her smoke pressed down flat by the damp air, and the muffled grey world outside makes the warm bright world within all the dearer. By evening, perhaps, the rain thins and lifts, and a watery sun breaks through low in the west, and lays a pale gold light across the wet sea and the dripping decks, and the family comes up to see it, and the air is washed and sweet, and the voyage goes on. One of the middle days, as it happened, was a Sunday, and Sunday at sea aboard a vessel of the Royal Navy has its own grave and lovely observance. In the forenoon the ship's company is mustered, clean and in their best, on the scrubbed deck, and divine service is held, as it is held aboard every ship of the fleet, the captain reading the prayers, the men standing bareheaded, family attending. The old words of the prayer book go out over the open sea. The prayers for those in peril on the water, the prayers for the sovereign, the prayers for a safe passage, and there is something deeply moving in them, said there on the deck of a yacht far from land, by men whose lives are spent upon the dangerous sea. A hymn is sung, the voices of 200 sailors and a royal family rising together over the sound of the wind and the wheels, carried away across the water. And then the service ends, and the men are dismissed, and the ship settles into the quieter Sunday routine, with only the necessary work done. And there is a stillness about the day, a setting apart, that even the sea seems to share. The Queen, who took her religion seriously and plainly, valued these sea services, and they gave to the voyage, once a week, a note of gravity and grace beneath all its pleasures. Then came the long golden afternoons, the best hours of the fine days when the sun was high and warm and the sea sparkled, and the family was all on deck together. Awnings were rigged to give shade, chairs were set out. The Queen sat with her sketching or her work, the Prince with a book or his endless questions to the officers, the children at their play. The hours drifted by, marked only by the bell and the changing light. The coast slid past, blue and remote. The sea ran sparkling to the horizon, and there was nothing at all that had to be done, no demand, no duty, no wait, only the warm air and the bright water, and the unhurried passage north. These were the hours the family treasured most, the hours of pure idle contentment, so rare in their crowded lives, and these were the hours, looking back, that would shine brightest in the memory, the long golden afternoons at sea, with everyone together, and the steamer carrying them gently toward home. There is more to tell of the nights at sea, for the night skies of the open water are a wonder that the family never tired of. On the clear nights, when the ship was well out from any land and the air was washed and dry, the stars came out in a profusion that no dweller on the land could imagine, not the dim scatter of a sky seen over rooftops and through smoke, but the whole blazing firmament from horizon to horizon, with the Milky Way flung across it in a broad pale band, and the familiar constellations standing out bright and clear, and the dark spaces between them filled, when the eye grew accustomed, with fainter and fainter stars beyond counting. The Prince, who knew his astronomy as he knew so much else, would name them for the children, the plough, and the pole star it pointed to, by which the steamer was steered, the broad square of Pegasus, the W of Cassiopeia, the red eye of Arcturus, and the planets brighter and steadier than the stars that wandered among them. And sometimes, on the darkest nights, there would be the cold green shimmer of the northern lights low in the sky to the north, the aurora, faint banners of light rising and fading over the pole, that the sailors watched with a kind of awe, and the whole ship would seem to hang suspended between the dark sea below and the blazing or shimmering heaven above, a small bright mote of human warmth in the midst of an immensity too great for the mind to hold. There is a tenderness, too, that runs quietly beneath the gladness of this voyage, and it touches the eldest of the children, the Princess Royal, for she is nearly grown now, and promised in marriage, and within not very many months she will leave, will be carried away south and east to Prussia, to a husband and a court and a country not her own, to begin the life of exile that royal daughters were bred to. She does not know, this summer, quite all that lies ahead of her, the homesickness, the difficulties, the loneliness of a clever English woman in a foreign court, but she knows that she is going, and her mother knows it, and there is between them this summer a particular closeness, a savouring of the time still left. The Queen watches her eldest daughter on the deck growing into her womanhood, and feels the coming parting like a small cloud on the edge of the bright sky, and she draws her close and treasures these days of the voyage, the more for knowing that there will not be many more such voyages with all the children together, that the family is at its fullest now, this summer, and will begin, soon, to scatter. It is the way of families, royal or not. The children grow and go, and the wise parent learns to hold the full years gently, knowing they will not last. The Queen is learning it now, this summer, on this voyage, with her eldest girl beside her and the hills drawing near. Let us linger over one of the calm days among the islands, for the calms of that coast are as famous as its storms, and as beautiful. There came a day when the wind dropped away to nothing, and the sea between the islands lay like a sheet of polished metal, unbroken from shore to shore, holding the hills and the sky perfectly mirrored in it, so that the vessel seemed to move through a doubled world, the islands above and the islands below meeting at the still bright surface. The ship's wake spread wide and smooth and slow across that mirror, the only mark on it for miles. The smoke from her funnels rose straight up and hung in the windless air. The cries of the seabirds came clear and far across the flat water. The heat of the sun lay on the deck. The family moved slowly, drowsily in the warmth. The very ship seemed to drowse, sliding through the calm at an easy pace, in no hurry, the wheels turning slow. On such a day the sense of peace was almost overwhelming. The deep stillness of the islands, the mirror calm of the water, the warm sun, the slow passage, and the family gave themselves up to it, idle and content, watching the doubled world slide by, feeling the cares of the land fall away into the deep quiet of the north. And there were the meals taken on deck, on the fine days, that had a charm the formal dinners below could not match. When the weather was warm and calm, a table might be set out under the awning, and the family take their luncheon or their tea in the open air, with the sea all around, and the islands sliding by, and the gulls wheeling overhead in hope of scraps. There is something in eating out of doors, at sea, that delights even the grandest people, the simple food tasting better in the salt air, the sense of freedom and informality, the children allowed to be a little wilder than they might be below. The Queen, who in the south was hedged about with the strictest ceremony at every meal, took a particular pleasure in these easy deck meals on the voyage, and the Prince, who loved the open air above all things, was at his happiest at them, telling the children the names of the passing islands, pointing out a seal or a distant whale, drawing the talk to the natural history of the coast. They were small things, these deck meals, but they were the kind of small thing that made the voyage precious, the kind of ordinary happy hour that the family would remember long after the grand occasions of their lives had blurred together in the memory. Let us return, too, to the matter of the rooms themselves, for the royal apartments aboard repay a slower walk than we gave them at the first. Step aft, past the working yacht, and move through them one by one. There is the dining saloon, panelled and carpeted, with its broad windows and its fitted sideboards where the silver is kept. There is the drawing-room or saloon, with its sofas and chairs and its piano braced against the bulkhead, where the family gathers in the evenings. There is the Queen's own sitting-room, warmest and quietest of all, with her writing-table and her journal and her books. There are the sleeping cabins, fitted with their gimbaled basins and their curtained windows and their warmed and made-up beds. There are the smaller rooms for the dressers and the personal servants close at hand. Everywhere there is the same fine joinery, the same warm mahogany, the same thoughtful provision for comfort and for the sea, the rails to keep the books in, the fiddles to keep the dishes on the table, the cunning catches that hold the doors and drawers against the roll. It is a house entire, folded into the after part of a warship, lacking nothing that a house ashore would have, and adding to it the particular cleverness of everything made fast against the motion of the sea. And there is the Queen's private hour of dressing for dinner, that we may glimpse but never intrude upon. By day she is the sovereign, the small, upright, formidable figure, whose name is on the coin and the proclamation, whose government rules a quarter of the earth, whose every public movement is watched and bowed to. But here, in a lamplit cabin aboard a steamer, with only her dresser by her and her husband expected at the table, she is something simpler, a woman not yet 40, wife and mother, dressing for an evening meal with her family. The dresser moves about her with the soft, exact economy of long service. There is little need of words, for the work is familiar to them both. The gowns she wears at sea and in the Highlands are plainer than her court dress, for she has no wish for grandeur here, and a ship is no place for it. And as she is dressed, her eye goes to the cabin window, and the changing light on the sea or the loch beyond, and her ear is half turned, listening for the small sounds that tell her the family is gathering. A child's quick step, her husband's voice, the soft business of the table being laid. It is the most private of hours and the most ordinary, and it is exactly its ordinariness that makes it so far from the world's idea of a queen. There was the coast itself to watch too through the daylight hours of the passage, for the craft was seldom wholly out of sight of land, and the coasts of the western seas are full of interest to a watchful eye. There was the coast of Wales, mountainous and blue, with its bold headlands and its little harbours. There was the long, low green coast of Ireland, away to the west, with its mountains rising behind. There was the Isle of Man in the midst of the Irish Sea, with its hills and its towns. And then, as the ship came north and west, the wild and broken coast of the Scottish Highlands, headland and sound and sea loch, following one upon another in endless variety. The prince followed the coast on the chart, marking the ship's progress, naming the capes and the bays. The children watched for the lighthouses, the white towers standing on their lonely rocks, that would wake at dusk and send their slow beams sweeping across the dark water. The Queen sketched the finer prospects, the better headlands, the islands at their loveliest. The coast was the ever-changing spectacle of the voyage, never the same from 1 hour to the next, unrolling its endless variety of rock and hill and water as the vessel steamed steadily north. And the laying of the table, each evening, was a small ceremony worth the watching. The cloth was laid white and smooth and exact, ironed without a crease. The Queen's silver was set out, piece by piece, burnished to a soft shine. The cut glasses were placed to catch the lamplight. The flowers were set down the centre. The footman moved around the table with the noiseless gliding precision of men who had set it 1,000 times in a dozen palaces and ships, who had it now in the very muscles of their hands. They placed each piece exactly, stepped back to judge the effect, reached in to shift a fork or straighten a glass by a finger's breadth until it satisfied them. And whether the ship lay still at anchor or moved gently over the sea, the table was always perfect, the silver always shining, the small civilized rituals of dinner always kept, a way of carrying the order and grace of home out into the wild north, of insisting, against all the dark and the distance, that here, within these few warm feet, the human and the gentle thing still held. It is worth dwelling, too, on the passage round the Mull of Kintyre, for it was the one stretch of the voyage where the open ocean made itself felt, and there is a grandeur in it that the sheltered waters lack. The Mull is the long bare arm of land that reaches down from the Scottish mainland toward Ireland, and round its foot the yacht must pass from the Irish Sea into the waters of the west, and here, where the headland thrusts out into the open, the swell of the Atlantic comes in unbroken across 1,000 miles of ocean. It is not, on a fair night, a rough passage. The swell is long and smooth and slow, not the short steep sea of a gale, but it is a different motion from the sheltered water, deeper and more majestic. The ship lifting slowly to each great smooth hill of water, and settling again into the trough beyond, rising and falling in a slow rhythm, like the breathing of something vast and asleep. To lie in one's berth and feel it is to feel the true power of the sea, the deep, patient heave of the ocean that has rounded that headland since, before there were ships to round it, and there is no fear in it. On such a night, only a kind of awe, and the steamer rides it easily and carries her sleepers on round the Mull and into the calmer waters beyond. There is a history beneath the beauty of these coasts, and it would be less than honest to pass it by, for the empty glens the family loved for their wildness were not always empty. Within living memory, many of them had been cleared, the old families who had held the land for centuries, driven off it to make room for the more profitable sheep, their cottages pulled down, their people scattered to the towns, to the coasts, to the emigrant ships that carried them away across the ocean to the new worlds. It was a hard and a bitter history, the clearances, and it lay quietly beneath the romance of the Highlands that the age and the royal family with it had taken so to heart. The very emptiness that made the glens seem so wild and so sublime was, in part, an emptiness that men had made. The royal travellers, loving the country for its beauty and its peace, did not always think to question the cost at which that emptiness had come. Few of their age did. But the history is there, under the loveliness, and a true picture of the coast must hold it. The people gone from the glens, the old way of life broken, the silence that is partly the silence of loss. It does not spoil the beauty, but it deepens it, and gives it a gravity, and reminds us that even the loveliest landscapes have their sorrows folded into them. Think, while the ship lies quiet, of the vast age of these sea lochs, for they are older than the mind can easily hold. The hills around them were raised and folded and worn down again across spans of time so vast that the whole of human history is the merest flicker at the end of them. The lochs themselves were carved in their present shapes by ice, by the vast glaciers that flowed down these valleys in the cold ages before there were people in this land at all, grinding and gouging and deepening the rock, and then melting back at the warming of the world and letting the sea come flooding in behind them to make the long narrow arms of salt water in which the vessel now floats. The stones of the shore have been rolled smooth by 10,000 years of tide. The peat in the bogs above has been laid down an inch in a lifetime since the forests the first people found here were old. The very shapes of the hills are the work of unimaginable time. To lie at anchor in such a place is to rest for a few hours upon the surface of a depth of time so vast it ought to make the heart quail. And yet it does not. For the night is so quiet and the ship so safe and the hills, for all their age, stand so gently around her. There is a comfort in the end, in being so small a thing, in so old and vast a place. And there were the children at their play, the brightest thread of all in the fabric of the voyage. The deck was their kingdom, and they ruled it from dawn to dusk. They watched the sailors at their work and learned the names of the ropes and the parts of the vessel. They were taken, the older ones, to see the great engines turning in the heat below, and came up wide-eyed with the wonder of it. They kept watch for seals and porpoises and whales, and called out in triumph when they spied one. They played their games up and down the deck under the indulgent eyes of the crew, who had a soft spot, as sailors always do, for children aboard. The littlest were carried about by their nurses, shown the sea and the birds and the islands, dandled and fussed over, and in the evenings before bed they would gather round their father at the rail or at the piano, and the day would wind down into the gentle rituals of the nursery, the supper, the prayers, the carrying down to the warmed beds, the lamp turned low, the small ones asleep almost before the nurse had left the cabin, rocked by the motion of the yacht. They were happy, those children, that summer on that voyage, as happy as children have ever been, and the happiness of them was half the joy of the passage for the watching parents, who knew, even if they did not say it, how precious and how fleeting such days are. Consider the wonder of the thing itself. that a family could be carried, in a few easy days, the whole length of Britain by the power of steam, when the grandparents would have reckoned such a journey in weeks of hardship. The age was an age of wonders, and the ship was one of them. Within the memory of people then alive, the only road north had been the coach road, a week and more of jolting over bad roads, of nights at rough inns, of rivers forded and axles broken, and the whole journey at the mercy of weather and footpads, and the sheer grinding distance. And now here was a steamer that swallowed that distance whole, driving north at 15 knots by day and night, through fair weather and foul, carrying her passengers in a comfort and a safety their grandparents could not have dreamed. It was of a piece with the railways that were spreading their iron net across the land, with the telegraph that was beginning to carry words faster than any horse, with all the restless inventive energy of the age, and the prince, who loved such things, who had given his great exhibition to celebrate them, felt the wonder of it keenly, and never tired of going below to watch the engines turn, the massive rods rising and falling, the power of fire and water and iron driving the ship through the sea. The world was shrinking, year by year. The far places were being drawn near, and this steamer with her beating wheels was one of the instruments of that vast shrinking, spare another thought for the household, the travelling village of perhaps 100 souls that came north with the family and lived its own life aboard. There was a whole society in it, with its own ranks and rules and rivalries, from the senior ladies in waiting down to the humblest undermaid, and the voyage, with its enforced closeness, threw them all together in a way that the fine houses ashore, with their many rooms and their careful separations, did not. In the wardroom the officers and the gentlemen of the household dined and talked. In the cabins of the ladies there were letters written and confidences exchanged and needlework done. Below, in the servants' quarters, the upper servants kept their own table and their own dignity, and the under servants theirs, and the talk ran freer than it ever could above stairs. There were friendships made on these voyages, and quarrels, and romances, and all the small human drama of any community shut up together for a time. And it all went on quietly, in the lower decks and the side cabins, around and beneath the family it existed to serve, a whole world of its own that the family scarcely saw and could not have done without. There were the lighthouses, too, that the children watched for as the dusk came down, the lowly white towers standing on their rocks and headlands along the dark coast. By day they were mere marks, white specks against the grey rock, but at dusk they woke, one by one, their lamps kindling as the light failed, and began to send their slow beams sweeping out across the darkening water. A flash, and a pause, and a flash, each one with its own rhythm by which the sailors knew it. To the family on deck in the evening, they were a kind of magic, these waking lights. To the officers they were the marks by which they steered, the friendly fires that warned of the rocks and guided the ship through the dark. There is something deeply moving in a lighthouse seen from the sea at dusk, the lonely faithful light kept burning through every night of the year by the keepers in their tower, for the sake of ships they would never see, and sailors they would never know, and the children, watching the beam sweep out across the water as the vessel passed, felt it without being able to name it, the comfort and the loneliness of the light in the dark. There is, in the end, the voice of the Queen herself, for she wrote it all down faithfully night after night in the journal she had kept since she was a girl of 13, and it is largely from her own pen that we know how these voyages felt to the people who made them. She wrote plainly and warmly with a quick eye for the thing seen and the thing felt, the beauty of a sunset over the islands, the dearness of the children, the kindness of a sailor, the comfort of the ship, her own deep happiness in being near the hills she loved. She wrote of the prince with an open devotion, recording his pleasure in the voyage, his interest in the engines, his happiness in the north. She wrote of the small events of the days, the porpoises and the seals, the music in the evenings, the calms and the rains, and reading her now, across all the years, one feels the warmth and the life of it still. The voice of a woman who was that summer simply and wholly happy, and who knew it, and who set it down so that it would not be lost, not knowing, as she wrote, that these were the golden years, that the happiness would not last, that the journal she kept so faithfully would one day be the record of a vanished contentment. She wrote it while it was still ordinary, and because she did, we may travel with her still. Let us go back once more to the very beginning, to the morning of departure, for it is worth feeling in full. The family had come down to the coast the evening before, perhaps, and slept ashore or come aboard late, and the morning of sailing dawned with that particular mixture of bustle and anticipation that the start of a journey always brings. The last of the baggage was swayed aboard, the heavy trunks and boxes hoisted in nets from the boats and lowered into the holds. The fresh stores came aboard, the last of the milk and eggs and green things and flowers. The pilot came off in his boat. The smoke began to thicken from the funnels as the fires were built up and the steam raised. The gauges climbed. The engineers stood ready below. On deck the seamen stood by the capstan and the cable. And then the word was passed quietly, and the anchor was weighed, the men walking round the capstan, the wet cable coming home link by link, until the anchor broke free of the bottom and rose dripping to the cathead, and the wheels began to turn, slowly at first, then settling into their beat, and the yacht gathered way, and the water began to slide past her sides, and the land began to fall astern. There is a particular feeling in that first movement away from the land, a small letting go, a setting out, and the family felt it, standing at the rail as the shore drew away, watching the green hills and the white cliffs and the little town sink slowly into the haze of distance, until there was only the sea, and the ship, and the long road north. The sounds of a steamer under way are quite different from the sounds of a ship at anchor, and they have their own deep music. There is the steady beat of the paddle wheels, the deep rhythmic churning that drives her, so constant that within an hour the ear ceases to hear it, and only feels it, a pulse in the timbers, the heartbeat of the craft. There is the rush and hiss of the water along the hull, parted at the bow and streaming aft, breaking white in the wake. There is the deep, muffled beat of the engines below, the heavy rods rising and falling. There is the creak and working of the vessel as she moves over the swell, the timbers speaking to one another. There is the wind in the rigging, the thin, high song of the air in the standing ropes, rising and falling with the strength of the breeze, and under all of it, when the ear has learned to listen past the machinery, there is the great sound of the sea itself, the wash and surge and murmur of the open water, into which all the ship's own sounds are woven. It is a sound world that the sleeper learns within a day, and then cannot do without. Many a sailor, home ashore, has lain awake missing the beat of the engines and the rush of the sea, the sounds that had rocked him to sleep so long. Bingshafit? The prince was forever among the officers, asking his endless questions, for he had a mind that wanted to know how everything worked, and a ship was a machine of endless fascination to him. He would climb to the bridge to watch the navigation, and ask the officer of the watch how the course was set, how the yacht was steered, how the position was found. He would go below to the engine room, and watch the heavy machinery turning, and ask the engineer how the steam was raised and the power transmitted to the wheels. He would study the charts, and follow the ship's progress, and mark the headlands as they passed. The officers who might have found such curiosity tiresome in another passenger found in the prince a genuine and an informed interest, for he understood what he was told and asked good questions, and they warmed to him for it, and took pleasure in showing him their vessel. It was characteristic of the man, the restless, eager mind, the love of knowledge for its own sake, the wish to understand everything, and it was one of the things that made him, for all his stiffness in public, so much loved by those who worked closely with him. And there was the galley, the hot, cramped, hard-working heart of the ship's comfort, where the cooks performed their daily miracles. To feed 350 souls at sea, family and household and crew, from a kitchen scarcely larger than a pantry, with only the stores loaded at the last port, was a labour of skill and organisation that went on, unseen, from before dawn till after dark. The cooks worked in the heat and steam, and the constant motion, turning out the plain hearty rations for the crew, and the finer dishes for the family's table, the soups and the fish and the roasts and the puddings. All of it timed and managed, so that it came up hot and right to each table at the proper hour. The fresh stores were precious and carefully managed. The fires were tended, the big coppers steamed, the stewards came and went with their trays. It was hard, hot, faithful work done out of sight. And the smooth abundance of the family's table, the sense that one had only to sit down and be fed, rested entirely upon it, as so much of the ship's serene comfort rested upon the unseen labour of the people who made it. There is the evening to dwell on too, not only one evening, but the shape of them all, the gentle ritual by which each day at sea wound down toward the night. As the sun westered, the light would change over the water, in the slow lovely way of sea light, the blue deepening, the gold path laid across the surface toward the sinking sun, the air cooling, the wind dropping with the day. The decks would empty of the day's bustle, the lamps would be lit, blooming one by one along the ship, the smell of the cooking would drift up from the galley, the family would gather below, then the dinner, quiet and homely, then the music, the prince at the piano, the old songs, then the carrying down of the younger children to their beds, then the last turn on deck for those who wished it under the gathering stars, then the turning down of the lamps, the setting of the watch, the slow settling of the whole steamer towards sleep. It was the same each evening, and the sameness was a comfort, a rhythm, a framework that held the days and made them feel ordered and safe. The family came to know it and to love it, the gentle descent of each evening toward the night, and we, travelling with them, may know and love it too, may let each evening's quiet ritual carry us down, as it carried them, towards sleep. Think, while they are so happy and so free, of the world they had left behind them in the south. That made this freedom so precious. There was the endless business of the monarchy, the boxes of state papers that arrived daily, the dispatches, the ministers wanting decisions, the foreign crises, the domestic troubles, the whole vast machinery of governing that pressed upon the Queen and the Prince every waking hour. There was the ceremony, the unending round of public appearances, the audiences, the levees, the drawing rooms, the official duties that filled their days and left them so little that was their own. There was the constant watching, the sense of being always on show, always observed, always judged, that is the peculiar burden of those born to thrones. All of that was the weight they carried the whole year through in the south, and all of that was what the voyage set aside for a few blessed days, when the boxes could wait and the ministers were far away and there was nothing to do but watch the sea and be a family. No wonder they loved these passages. No wonder the Queen's Journal sings with the happiness of them, for they were, more than almost any other time, the hours when the crown was set down and the human life picked up. There came, on the calm, clear nights, the rising of the moon over the sea, and it was a sight to draw everyone on deck. The moon would lift over the eastern horizon, huge and golden at first, low over the water, laying a path of light across the sea straight to the ship, a road of broken gold and silver that moved as the steamer moved, always pointing to her, and as the moon climbed it would shrink and whiten and brighten, and the path would narrow and silver, and the whole sea would be lit with a cool pale light, the wave tops catching it, the wake gleaming, the sails and the rigging and the funnels standing black against the luminous sky. On such a night the family would stay late on deck, loath to go below, watching the moonlight on the water and the dark coast sliding by, and the broad silver track following the ship. And there was a magic in it, a beauty almost too much to bear. The cool light and the warm night and the slow passage and the silver sea. These were the nights one remembered, the moonlit nights at sea, and the children, allowed to stay up late for the wonder of it, would carry the memory of them all their lives. And there is the prince's heart to consider, for the north meant more to him than mere pleasure. It touched something deep in him, the exile's longing for home. Albert had given up a good deal to marry his English queen, his country, his language, the green wooded uplands of the little German duchy where he had been a boy, the whole world of his childhood. He had taken up instead a strange and lonely role, the consort of a reigning queen, neither king nor subject, forever a little foreign, forever working without the recognition his labours deserved, carrying a heavy weight, and bearing it almost alone. And in the Highlands he found a kind of solace for that exile, the hills that reminded him of home, the cool, clean air, the quiet, the freedom, the chance to be simply a man among his family, rather than a prince among courtiers. It was not his home, but it was the nearest thing to home that his new life afforded him, and he loved it with the particular intensity of a man who has lost one home and found, late and partial, another. The voyage north was for him a kind of homecoming, though to a home not his own, and the gladness that lightened him as the vessel steamed into the islands was the gladness of a homesick heart drawing near to comfort. The dawns among the islands deserved their own dwelling, for they were the loveliest mornings of the voyage. The northern night was brief at that season, and the light came early, and the family, or those of them who woke for it, would find the ship lying in some sheltered anchorage with the dawn just breaking over the eastern hills. The first thing was the mist, for the calm nights bred mist, and it lay on the water at dawn in soft white wreaths and banks, filling the lower air, hiding the shores, so that the yacht seemed to float in a world of pale vapour, the hilltops rising clear above it into the brightening sky, while their feet were drowned in white. Then the sun would lift over the hills and touch the mist and set it glowing, and slowly as the warmth grew, the mist would lift and thin and tear apart, drawing up off the water in trailing shreds, revealing the shores and the hills and the still bright loch beneath, until the last of it was gone, burned away, and the morning stood clear and washed and new, the water like glass, the hills green and sharp, the air sweet and cool. To watch a Highland dawn from the deck of a ship, the mist lifting off the loch, was to watch the world made new each morning, and it was worth the early waking, for those who could manage it. The cliffs of the larger islands were alive with seabirds, and the steamer would sometimes pass close enough beneath them to see and hear the teeming life of the ledges. There were the guillemots and the razorbills packed close on their narrow shelves, thousands upon thousands of them, the kittiwakes on their tiny nests, crying their own name endlessly, the puffins whirring out from their burrows in the turf above, the big gulls and the gannets wheeling and crying, the whole face of the cliff white with birds and loud with their clamour, the air below thick with them, the sea at the foot of the rocks dotted with them, swimming and diving. It was one of the finest spectacles of the coast, these seabird cliffs, and the children loved them above almost anything, pointing and exclaiming at the wheeling multitudes, watching the birds plunge and dive and soar. The prince, the naturalist, would name the kinds for them. The queen would marvel at the abundance of life, and the craft would steam slowly past beneath the loud and living cliffs, and leave them astern, and the clamour would fade, and the quiet of the open water return. The queen sketched throughout the voyage, for she had a real and a trained talent for it, and the passage gave her subjects without end. She would sit on deck with her sketchbook and her pencils or her watercolours, and set down the finer prospects as they passed, a headland at its best, an island in a good light, the hills behind a loch, a sunset over the sea. She had been taught by good masters, and she had a true eye, and her sketches, though modest, caught the spirit of the scenes, and they were, besides, a way of holding the voyage, of fixing the passing beauty before it slid away astern. She and the prince both sketched, and would compare their work, and the children too were encouraged to try their hands, for the family believed in such accomplishments and practised them seriously. To see the Queen of England sitting quietly on the deck of her yacht, sketchbook on her knee, absorbed in catching the line of a distant hill, is to see her at her most private and her most human, not the sovereign, not the public figure, but simply a woman with a gift, taking pleasure in using it in a place she loved. And on the warm, fine days an awning would be rigged over a part of the deck, to give shade from the northern sun that could be surprisingly strong, and beneath it the family would gather for the long idle hours of the afternoon. Chairs and rugs would be set out. The Queen would sit with her work or her sketching or a book. The Prince would read or write or talk with the officers, or watch the coast through his glass. The children would play or be read to or lie watching the clouds. The hours would drift by, marked only by the bell and the gradual changing of the light. The coast would slide past, blue and green and grey. The sea would sparkle to the horizon, and there would be nothing at all that had to be done. It was the purest idleness, and the family treasured it, for idleness was the one luxury their crowded lives almost never allowed. And beneath the awning, in the warm shade, with the sea all around and the islands sliding by, they were as content and as free as they would ever be, a family on holiday, on a fine day, with nowhere to be but exactly where they were. It is worth going down once more into the working ship, the part of her that the family seldom saw, for it was a world entire, and a marvel in its way. Forward and below lay the crew's quarters, where 200 seamen lived their close-ordered life, the mess decks where they ate at the long tables, the spaces where they slung their hammocks packed close for the night. There were the storerooms and the holds, where the provisions and the water and the coal and the baggage were stowed, each in its place, counted and accounted for. There was the carpenter's shop, and the sailmaker's, and the forge where the smith worked his iron. There was the surgeon's domain, the small sick bay, where any illness or hurt was tended. There were the great bunkers of coal that fed the furnaces, growing emptier as the voyage went on, the trimmers labouring in the black dust to bring the coal to the stokers. It was a hard, cramped, hard-working world, the working vessel, all iron and oak and labour and discipline. And it lay directly beneath the carpeted and lamplit world of the family, divided from it by no more than a deck or two, the one resting upon the other. The soft life above carried always by the hard life below. The coast the ship threaded was a place of strong tides and strong currents, and the navigation of it was no small art. The tide ran hard through the narrow sounds, racing one way for 6 hours and then turning and racing back. In some of the narrows it ran so fast that a yacht must time her passage to the turn or wait for the slack, lest the current overpower her. There were whirlpools where the tides met, famous and feared, that a wise master gave a wide berth. The officers knew these waters, or had the charts and the tide tables that held the knowledge of those who had gone before, and they timed the ship's passages, and watched the set of the current, and conned her through the narrows at the right state of the tide, with a care that the idle family above never guessed at. It was one more of the hidden labours on which the serene passage rested. The constant watchful seamanship that read the water and the tide and the weather, and brought the ship safe through waters that had wrecked many a vessel whose master knew them less well, or respected them less. There is something to be said too about the nature of the rest the voyage gave, for it was a particular and a precious kind of rest, and it is the very thing we are seeking, you and I, as we travel with them towards sleep. It was the rest of being carried, of being borne along, safe and warm and provided for, with no effort of one's own toward a destination one desired. The steamer did the work, the sea did the rocking, the crew kept the watch, and the family had only to be carried idle and trusting through the days and the nights. There is a deep peace in that, in being carried, in surrendering the effort and the vigilance to other and stronger hands. It is the peace of the child in the cradle, of the sleeper in the night, of the trusting heart that lets go its cares, and the voyage gave it in full measure, the long days of being borne north over the sea toward home, with nothing to do but rest and watch and be carried. Let that be the rest we take from it too, as we travel with them, the rest of being carried, of letting go, of trusting the ship and the sea and the night to bear us gently toward the morning. And the season itself was turning, as the voyage went north, in the way that the northern summer turns. They had come north in the high summer, when the days were at their longest, and the nights at their shortest, when the light lingered far into the evening, and came again early in the morning, when the brief darkness was never quite complete. The heather was not yet in its full bloom on the hills, but the green was deep, and the bracken high, and the year at its fullest. The birds were busy with their young, the deer were on the high ground, the whole land was at the brimming top of its short northern summer. There was a poignancy in it, the high summer of the year matching the high summer of their lives, the fullness that does not last, the brimming season that has already, at its height, begun imperceptibly to turn toward the autumn. But that turning was far off yet, weeks and months away, and the summer stood now at its full, the long light evenings, the brief bright nights, the green hills, the brimming year, and the family sailed north through the very height of it, toward the house and the hills and the summer waiting, in the fullest and the most golden season of the year and of their lives. There was more than one night at anchor in the islands, for the voyage was unhurried, and the vessel lay each night in some sheltered loch or bay, and each anchorage had its own character and its own beauty. One night she might lie in a wide bay open to the west, where the sunset filled the whole sky with fire, and laid a road of gold across the water to the ship, and the family stood at the rail to watch the day die in glory over the sea. Another night she might lie deep in a narrow loch among high hills, in a stillness so complete that the fall of a stone on the distant shore would carry across the water, and the hills stood close and dark, and the stars hung bright in the strip of sky between them. Another might find her off a low green island, with the white cottages of a township scattered along the shore, and the smoke of the evening fires rising, and the sound of a dog barking or a child calling, coming faintly across the water, the small homely sounds of human life in the midst of the wild. Each anchorage was different. Each had its own loveliness, and the family came to know and love them, these quiet nights in the sheltered waters of the west, the vessel at rest, the hills around, the stars above, the deep peace of the north. The islands themselves were a world of endless variety and old, deep history, though the family passing through them in their comfort saw mostly their beauty. There were the high mountainous islands, with their high peaks and their deep glens and their wild empty interiors. There were the low green fertile islands, with their crofts and their cultivation and their scattered people. There were the small bare rocky islets, home only to the seals and the seabirds. There were the old stones on them, the standing stones and the ruined chapels and the broken castles, the marks of the peoples who had lived there through the long centuries, the ancient folk who raised the stones, the early saints who brought their faith to these remote shores, the clans who held the land and fought their endless feuds, the lords of the isles who once ruled these waters like kings. It was a country with a deep past, the islands layered with the lives of all who had gone before. And though the royal family saw mostly the beauty and the peace, the past was there beneath it, in every old stone and every cleared glen and every name on the chart, the long human story of the wild and lovely coast through which they sailed. There were the small, unlooked-for pleasures of the voyage, too, the things that could not be planned but that made the days. There was the morning a school of dolphins joined the ship and played about her bows for an hour, leaping and diving, to the children's endless delight. There was the evening. A fishing boat came alongside in a calm and sold the yacht a basket of fresh herring that the cook made into a supper better than any banquet. There was the day the steamer passed close under a sheer cliff where an eagle was soaring, and everyone stood silent to watch the huge bird turn on its motionless wings against the rock. There was the night the northern lights came out, faint and green over the pole, and the sailors pointed, and the children stared. These were the things that could not be arranged, the gifts of the voyage, the unrepeatable moments that made each day different from the last, and they were, often, the things best remembered afterward, the small bright accidents of beauty that the long passage threw up, day by day, for those with the eyes to see them. And through it all, holding it all, was the steady, purposeful movement north the sense, beneath each pleasure of the passage, that the ship was going somewhere, was carrying them toward a destination they loved, was bringing them home. It was that, perhaps more than anything, that gave the voyage its peculiar happiness. For a journey toward a place one dreads is a weariness however comfortable, but a journey toward a place one loves is a joy however long, and every mile of it is lit by the gladness of the arrival to come. And the family was going toward the place they loved best on earth, toward the hills and the house and the summer, toward the freedom and the peace and the simple family happiness that the Highlands gave them. And so each day of the voyage, each island passed and each loch anchored in, and each meal taken, and the music of each evening was lit from within by the joy of where it was all tending, that they were going home, and the going was itself a happiness, and the steamer carried them faithfully on, north and ever north, toward the granite house among the hills, and the summer waiting, and the family whole and glad in the place that was theirs. Let us think once more of what it was to make a home upon the moving sea. For that, in the end, was the genius of the ship, that she was not merely a vessel, but a dwelling, that carried with it everywhere the order and comfort and habit of home. A house ashore stands still, and the seasons come and go around it, but this house moved, carrying its inhabitants and their whole settled way of life across the face of the waters, so that they woke each morning in a new place, and yet in the same rooms, the same beds, the same familiar comforts. The journal lay on the same table. The silver was laid on the same cloth. The piano stood braced in the same corner. The children kept the same nursery hours. The lamps were lit at the same hour after dusk. The view beyond the windows changed, a southern coast one morning, the open sea the next, a highland loch the third, but the small world within stayed constant, a fixed point of home and habit moving through the changing country. And there was a deep comfort in that, in carrying one's home with one, in waking in new waters but in one's own bed. It is a comfort the snail knows, and the tortoise, and the sailor, and the few fortunate travellers who can carry their dwelling with them, and the royal family knew it aboard their moving home as they were carried north through the summer seas. And the routine of the days was itself a comfort, a gentle framework that held the voyage and made it feel safe and ordered. There was the waking and the breakfast, the morning on deck or below, the noon observation, the small daily ceremony of fixing the ship's place in the world, the luncheon, the long idle afternoon, the changing of the light toward evening, the dinner, the music, the carrying down of the children, the setting of the watch, the turning down of the lamps, the night. Each day kept the same shape, marked by the bell and the watches and the meals, and the sameness was not dull but soothing, a rhythm one could lean upon, a sense of order and competence and care surrounding the idle hours. The family, whose lives ashore were so crowded and so driven, found in the simple routine of the vessel a kind of rest, the rest of a life reduced to its essentials, of days that asked nothing but to be lived through gently, of a framework that held them safe and let them be idle within it. And we who keep our own crowded, driven lives may feel the comfort of it too, the gentle, ordered rhythm of the days at sea, the sense of being held and carried through them, asked for nothing but to rest. There is a stillness that comes on a long voyage in which the mind at last lets go, a stillness that the family found somewhere in the middle days of the passage, when the land was well astern and the rhythm of the ship had soaked into them, and the cares of the south had faded to a distant murmur. It is the stillness of the sea, the vast calm of the open water, that enters into those who spend time upon it. The mind, which ashore is forever busy, forever turning over its cares and its plans, slows and quiets and at last falls still, soothed by the endless rhythm of the sea and the sky and the days. The Queen felt it. The Prince felt it. Even the children, in their way, felt it, growing calmer and easier as the voyage went on. It is one of the gifts the sea gives, this stillness of the mind, this letting go of the endless inner business. And it is perhaps the deepest rest of all, deeper than mere sleep, the rest of a mind at peace, soothed still by the great calm of the waters. Let it come to you too, that stillness, as you travel with them. Let the rhythm of the yacht and the sea soak into you. Let the cares of your own day fade to a distant murmur. Let the mind at last fall still. And so the voyage went on, day after gentle day, north and ever north, the ship carrying her sleeping, waking, dreaming family up the long western edge of Britain toward the hills they loved. The sea changed, and the coast changed, and the light changed, hour by hour and day by day. But the steamer went on, steady and faithful, her wheels beating their patient pulse, her wake unrolling behind her, her people held safe within her. And the days were good days, and the nights were peaceful nights, and the family was whole and happy, and the summer stood at its full, and the hills drew nearer, and there was, over all of it, that deep contentment of a journey toward a beloved place, made in fair weather, in good company, with everyone together and nothing yet lost. These were the golden days, and we have been allowed to share them, and now, as the ship draws near at last to the end of her northward road, it is nearly time for us, too, to let the voyage carry us down into sleep. There is one wonder of the night sea that we have not yet named, and it is among the loveliest of them all, the cold living light that wakes in the water itself on the dark, calm nights. For the sea of these coasts holds, in its summer waters, a teeming life so fine the eye cannot see it by day, and on the still warm nights this hidden multitude gives off a faint and silvery fire wherever the water is stirred. The wake of the craft would kindle with it, a long pale ribbon of glimmering light unrolling astern over the black water, every eddy and swirl of it shining. The bow wave would burst into cold sparks as the stem cut the sea, and where a porpoise crossed beneath the surface in the dark, it would leave a track of fire behind it. A glowing arrow shot through the deep. The children, brought up on deck to see it, could scarcely believe their eyes. The sea on fire, and yet cold, the dark water lit from within. The sailors, who had seen it 1,000 times, watched it still with a quiet pleasure, and the family would lean at the rail in the warm dark and gaze down at the burning wake, at the cold silver fire streaming away behind the ship into the night. One more of the quiet marvels of the sea that the voyage laid before them, asking nothing in return but that they wonder at it. The smell of the vessel and the sea was a world of its own, and it is worth breathing in, for nothing calls a place back to the mind so surely as its scent. There was, first and always, the clean salt bite of the sea air, washed and cool, that filled the lungs, and seemed to wash the very mind clean of the closeness of the land. There was threaded through it the working smell of the yacht herself, the tar of the rigging, the oil of the engines, the coal smoke that drifted down from the funnels, the fresh wet smell of the scrubbed decks in the morning. There were the warm domestic smells of the rooms below, the beeswax of the polished wood, the lamp oil, the flowers in their bowls, the good smell of the cooking, drifting up from the galley at the meal hours. And there were the smells of the land that came off the shore at the anchorages, the green resinous breath of the bracken and the birch, the sweet smoke of the peat fires, the wet earth smell after rain, the faint sheep and heather smell of the hills that to the family had become one of the best-loved scents in all the world, the smell of the north, of arrival, of the holiday begun. To breathe the air aboard was to breathe all of these at once, the salt and the tar and the smoke and the wax and the peat and the bracken woven together into the one unrepeatable scent of a voyage north in summer. A ship of the Navy speaks a language of her own upon the sea, and the family came to know a little of it as the voyage went on. There were the flags, the bright signal flags that the ships of the fleet used to talk to one another across the water, each with its meaning, broken out at the halyards in strings and read by the watching officers. There was the dipping of the ensign in salute when another vessel passed, the courteous lowering and raising of the flag, answered in kind, two ships exchanging respect across the empty sea. There was the language of the bell, the half-hourly strokes that told the time and the watch to all aboard, the language of the boatswain's call, the high-piping whistle that passed the orders along the deck. There were the salutes of the guns on the grand occasions, the puff of white smoke and the flat report rolling away across the water and echoing back from the hills. It was an old language, the language of the sea, built up over centuries of ships and sailors, and it ran through the days of the voyage as a kind of music beneath the human talk. The flags and the bells and the pipes and the guns, the steamer speaking in her own tongue to the sea and the sky and her sisters of the fleet. And there was, aboard, the quiet provision for health and hurt, for no ship went to sea without her surgeon and her sick bay, and the safety of the family rested in part upon them. The surgeon kept his morning rounds, tending the small ills of the crew, the cuts and the bruises and the fevers that any community of men will throw up. He had his small store of medicines and instruments, his sick bay where any serious case could be nursed. For the family there were the royal physicians, who travelled everywhere with the Queen, watchful over the health of the sovereign and her children, ready for any ailment, any accident, any sudden need. It was one more of the unseen safeguards that hedged the family round, one more of the quiet provisions that let them be idle and careless aboard, knowing that whatever might befall, there were skilled and watchful people ready to meet it. The sea was a dangerous element, for all the comfort of the vessel. Illness and accident were never far, and the calm, idle days of the family rested, like so much else, upon the watchful readiness of others, the physicians and the surgeon and the crew, who carried the care so that the family need not. The sea roads of the West have names as old as the hills above them, and it is worth naming a few of the waters through which the ship made her way, for the naming gives a shape to the passage. There is the Sound of Mull, the broad sheltered channel that runs between the large island of Mull and the mainland shore, hill-flanked on either hand, with its ruined castle keeping watch above the narrows and its scattered townships along the water. The vessel would steam up it in the morning light with the heather slopes rising close to port and starboard, as fair a sea road as any in the kingdom. There are the narrow sounds where the tide runs hard between the islands, that a master must time to the turn of the water. There are the wide reaches where the sea opens out, and the high hills of the mainland stand blue and remote beyond the nearer isles, range upon range fading into the haze. There is, far to the north and west on the clearest days, the dark serrated line of the greater islands, the high peaks of sky and the outer isles beyond, rising at the very edge of sight. Each water has its name and its character and its long human story, and the ship threaded them one after another, hour by hour and day by day, up the old sea roads of the west toward the north. It is part of the peace of such a voyage that the world cannot easily reach it, and the family felt the gladness of being, for a few days, beyond the ordinary reach of news. Ashore, the dispatches came daily, the red boxes of state papers, the letters, the newspapers, the unending tide of business and information that pressed upon them every hour. At sea, that tide fell away. A yacht under way was hard to reach. The mails could be sent aboard only when she touched at a port or lay at an anchorage near a town, and even then the news they brought was already days old, the urgent matters of the south grown distant and faint by the time they arrived. There was in those days, before the wires reached every corner of the land, a true and a blessed cutting off in going to sea, a few days when the world simply could not get at you, when the crises that seemed so pressing ashore could not follow you out onto the water, when there was nothing you could do about any of it, and so for once, nothing you need do. The Queen and the Prince felt the relief of it keenly. The boxes were closed, the business set aside, the world held at arm's length by the simple fact of the sea between, and into that quiet, that enforced and welcome idleness, the peace of the voyage came flooding. And let us give a thought, too, to the men of the lower deck as human creatures, and not merely as the faithful hands that worked the ship, for each of them was a life entire. The seaman coiling a rope on the foredeck had a home somewhere, a village on a coast, a mother or a wife waiting for the letters he sent when the steamer touched port. The young boy learning his trade among the older hands was perhaps on his first long voyage, homesick and proud by turns, drinking in the strangeness of it all. The grey-bearded petty officer had spent 30 years upon the sea, had served in distant waters, had stories he told below decks in the dog watches that held the younger men silent. The stoker labouring in the heat had a strength and a patience that few of the fine people aft could have matched. But they had their friendships and their feuds, their songs and their superstitions, their fierce pride in the steamer and their long-suffering humour. They were men, each with his own history and his own hopes, gathered together for a time aboard this one ship, bending their 200 separate lives to the single task of carrying the family north. The family scarcely knew them, and never would, but they were there, all about them, the human foundation of the whole serene passage, and they deserved to be remembered as the people they were. The weather of the western seas is a changeable and a moving thing, and even on a blessed voyage there were the signs of it always in the sky, to be read by those who knew the language. The officers watched the glass, the barometer in its place below, that rose and fell with the coming weather, and gave its silent warning of what the sky would bring. They watched the look of the clouds, the high mares' tails that spoke of wind to come, the banking grey in the west that meant rain, the hard clear blue that promised a fair day. They watched the set of the swell, the long waves that ran ahead of a distant storm, even under a calm sky, the messengers of weather still below the horizon. It was a constant reading, a watchfulness that never slept, for the sea gives its warnings to those who can read them and punishes those who cannot. And the safety of the idle family rested, here as everywhere, upon the unsleeping attention of the men who watched the sky and the glass and the sea, and shaped the ship's course and her anchorages by what they read there, so that the fair weather held and the voyage went on in peace. It is worth turning the picture round for a moment and seeing the vessel not from her own decks but from the shore, from the eyes of the people of the coast, to whom her passing was a wonder and an event. Imagine a crofter on a hillside above one of the sounds, cutting his peats in the long northern evening, who straightens his back and shades his eyes and sees, coming up the water below him, a big black ship with her tall masts and her 2 funnels and the gold line running her length, the white ensign at her stern, the paddle wheels beating the sea to foam on either side. He would know her for the Royal Yacht, for word of her coming ran ahead along the coast, and he would stand and watch her pass, this apparition out of another world, carrying the Queen herself through his own quiet waters, and would carry the sight home to tell his family by the fire that night. Imagine the children of a shore township running down to the water's edge to wave as she went by, the fishermen in their boats resting on their oars to watch her pass, the whole small life of the coast pausing for the few minutes of her passage to mark the going by of the great yacht and the great lady she carried. To the family aboard, the coast was a passing spectacle, but to the coast, the ship was the spectacle, a rare and shining visitation, long remembered and long told of in the townships of the West. And at night, to those ashore, she was a stranger and a lovelier thing still, a constellation of warm lights moving on the dark water where no lights should be. The crofter banking his fire for the night, or the fisherman out late after the herring, would see her lamps come up the sound or across the bay, a cluster of golden points gliding through the dark, and would hear, perhaps, across the still water, the faint beat of her engines, or a thread of music drifting from her lit saloon, the Queen and the Prince at their songs. It must have seemed a thing half-dreamed, that moving island of light and warmth and music passing through the wide dark emptiness of the northern night, a glimpse of another and a richer world gliding by and gone, leaving the dark water and the silent hills as they were before. The people of the coast lived hard and plain lives, close to the wind and the sea and the poor thin soil, and the passing of the royal yacht, by day a wonder and by night a kind of vision, was one of the bright threads in the long plain weave of their years, a thing to remember and to tell of. The night the Queen's steamer went by all lit upon the dark water. There is a deep old comfort in the thought of a lit ship passing safe through the night, and it is a comfort that belongs to us, as much as to the people of that coast, watching across the years. For the craft in the dark is an image of what we all most wish for, a place of warmth and light and human company and safety, moving steadily and surely through the vast surrounding dark toward a destination of home. The night is wide and cold and old, the sea is deep, the hills are silent, and through it all the small bright ship goes on, carrying her sleeping family, her lamps burning, her course set, her watch keeping, sure of her way, unafraid, that is the image to carry down with you into sleep tonight. Not the dark, which is only the dark, but the lit vessel moving through it, the warmth in the midst of the cold, the light in the midst of the night, the safe and steady passage through the wide dark world toward the morning. You are aboard her. You are carried, the lamps are lit, the watch is set, the course is true, and there is nothing now to do but rest, and let her carry you on. Let us look in, gently, on the nursery world that travelled aboard, for the royal children carried their whole small kingdom with them, and it was a tender thing. There were the nursery cabins fitted out for the little ones, with their small cots made fast against the motion, and their warm bedding and their few cherished toys. There were the nurses and the nursery maids, kind-weathered women who had charge of the youngest, and who turned the strangeness of a ship into something safe and homely for the children in their care. The day in the nursery kept its own settled round, apart from the grander rhythms of the yacht, the waking and the washing and the dressing, the porridge and the bread and honey, the morning airing on deck wrapped against the breeze, the rest in the warm of the day, the supper, the prayers, the carrying to bed. The little ones knew nothing of queens and princes and the weight of crowns. They knew only that they were aboard a marvellous steamer, that there were sailors who were kind to them, and a sea full of wonders to watch, that their mother and father were near, that the days were full of interest, and the nights were warm, and rocked by the gentle motion, soothed by the soft sounds of the ship. The smallest of them slept as well at sea as ever they had ashore, perhaps better, for there is no cradle in the world so deep and so steady as a great vessel riding easy on a tranquil sea, and there was the Queen herself and her own ease upon the water, for not everyone takes kindly to the sea, and it is worth marking how the fair weather and the steady ship gave her the peace to love it. On a rough passage, in a hard sea, even the grandest traveller may be brought low, and the sea may become a misery rather than a delight. But this voyage was blessed, the weather kind, the water for the most part smooth, the motion easy, and so the Queen was free to find in the sea the peace and the pleasure it can give when it is in a kindly mood. She sat on deck in the fair days and watched the coast and sketched and was content. She slept soundly in the still nights, rocked by the easy motion. She felt the cares of the south fall away with the miles of sea between. The sea on such a voyage was a friend and not a trial, and the Queen, who in a gale might have wished herself ashore, in this fair summer weather gave herself up to the calm pleasure of the passage, and loved it, and set down her love of it faithfully in her journal, night after quiet night. There is in the end a particular sweetness to the doing of nothing, when one's life is otherwise too full, and it was that sweetness above all that the voyage gave. The family's days ashore were crowded to the brim, every hour spoken for, every duty waiting, the whole vast apparatus of the monarchy pressing in on every side. But here, on the sea, there was nothing that must be done. One could sit on deck for an hour and watch a single island draw near and slide by and fall astern, and that was a sufficient occupation for the hour. One could follow the flight of a single bird, or the play of the light on the water, or the gradual building and breaking of a cloud over a far hill, and ask no more of the time than that. One could simply be present, be idle, be at rest, be carried without guilt and without hurry, in a way that the driven life ashore never allowed. It is a luxury, that idleness, perhaps the rarest and the deepest of all the luxuries the voyage held, and the family drank it in, the long, empty, unhurried hours, the blessed permission to do nothing at all but watch the sea and be carried north. And it is that same sweetness, that same permission, that the voyage offers you now, at the end of your own full day, the permission to set it all down, to do nothing, to ask nothing of yourself, to simply be carried idle and at rest through the quiet hours towards sleep. The man who held the command of all this deserves a portrait of his own, for the captain of the royal yacht carried a burden unlike any other in the service. To be chosen for it was a high mark of favour, a sign that one stood high in the trust of the Admiralty and the Crown, and the command brought honour and notice and the near presence of the sovereign herself. But it brought, with the honour, a delicacy and a strain that few other commands could match. For he must run a vessel faultlessly, taut, smart, safe, ready, the equal in seamanship of any vessel in the fleet, for the eyes of the whole navy were upon her, and any failure would be his alone, and he must do it while carrying, a few feet away through a bulkhead, the private family of the Queen of England, into whose privacy he must never intrude, whose comfort he must never disturb, whose peace he must guard as carefully as their safety. He must be everywhere and seen nowhere, must command 240 men with absolute authority while bowing himself to the gentle informal sovereignty of the family aft, must hold in his hands every hour of the passage the safety of the most precious lives in the kingdom, and bear that weight without a sign. It was a command to age a man, for all its honour, and the quiet competence with which it was carried, voyage after voyage, was a thing the idle family aft scarcely guessed at and never quite could thank. He stood his watches or took his rest knowing the ship was in good hands. He conned her through the narrows and chose her anchorages, and read the weather and set her course. He received the family's wishes, and saw them met before they were well spoken. He kept, through it all, the grave courteous distance that his strange double office required. And when the voyage was done, and the family safely landed, he would take his leave of them with a bow, and they would thank him kindly, and never know the half of what he had carried for them across the days and the nights of the passage. It is the lot of those who serve at such a height to bear the weight unseen, to be thanked lightly for a labour known only to themselves, to give their best skill and their deepest care to people who can never quite imagine what it cost. The captain of the royal yacht was such a man, and the serene and happy voyage that the family remembered was, in no small part, the achievement of his unsleeping and unregarded care. The yacht comes to her last anchorage in the failing light, in a sea loch deep among the mainland hills, and the approach to it is the loveliest of the whole voyage. The loch reaches inland between steep flanks of hill until you can no longer tell where the sea ends and the land begins. The water is dark glass, sheltered and still, and the hills rise close and high on either hand, going violet in the dusk, their tops catching the last gold of the sun. The ship slows, the wheels turning slower and slower. The leadsman swings his lead and calls the depth. The officers con her in, watching the marks on the shore, and then the engines stop, and the deep silence of the hills comes flooding in, and the anchor goes down with its run of cable, and the steamer swings to and comes to rest. She lies a quarter-mile out from a shore of birch and bracken in the heart of the hills, with a single thread of peat smoke rising straight from a cottage chimney into the windless air, and the curlew calling its long falling note from the dark hill, and the whole wild country settling into the northern night around her. It is as deep a peace as there is anywhere on earth, and the family, gathered below, can feel it in the very stillness of the ship. Let us think, while she lies so quiet, of the weather, and of how kind it has been to them on this passage, for this is a coast far better known for its storms than its calms, and the fair weather that has held the whole voyage is a gift and a rare one, not to be counted upon. The west of Scotland is a place of restless moving weather, of fronts marching in off the long fetch of the Atlantic, of rain that can set in for days, of winds that come howling down the glens and whip the lochs into short, steep, angry seas. A steamer caught out on such a coast in such a blow has hard and dangerous work to do, and the officers of this ship, for all the softness of the life she carries, are seamen first and last, and they rid the sky and the glass, and the set of the swell with a constant care, and they have chosen each anchorage of the voyage with that care in mind, knowing where the vessel would lie safe, whatever the morning might bring. But the Atlantic has been sleeping these 4 days, the glass has stood high and steady, and so they have come north in fair weather and easy seas, blessed in the passage as in so much else, and they may all sleep easy tonight, knowing the yacht is safe and the night is fair, and the journey very nearly done. There is time, this last evening, to stand a while with the prince on deck, for he loves these hours above all, and they show him at his best. He stands at the rail with his hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the darkening hills, and the deep lines of his face ease and soften and let go. The Highlands give him something that England, for all his faithful service to it, never quite gives him a likeness of home, of the wooded green uplands of the German boyhood he gave up to marry an English queen. A quieter and more private and more human kind of life than the cold, glittering one his rank has fastened upon him. He breathes the cool, clean air with an open and almost boyish relief. He reads the shape of the darkening land with the loving eye of a man who sketches it, and plans buildings to sit in it, and means to plant trees upon it, that will not reach their height until long after he himself is gone. And when one of his older children comes quietly up the deck to stand beside him at the rail, he turns and bends to them with a warmth and a full attention that the stiff, dutiful public prince is almost never seen to show, for it is here, among these hills, that this difficult and gifted and lonely man is allowed, for a few weeks each year, simply to be a father. And then the last evening aboard winds gently down, as all the evenings have, towards sleep. The music dies away, the youngest children are carried down to their beds, the household drifts to its cabins, the lamps are turned down low and then out. The watch is set on the silent deck, the marine sentries stand at the doors, the off-duty seamen sleep swung in their hammocks, The duty stoker keeps his banked fires alive against the morning. In her own cabin, the Queen sits a last few minutes at her writing table and opens her journal and writes the entry of the day of the passage up the coast, of the great hills, of the dear children, of the deep peace of the loch in which they lie, of the joy of being so very near now to the house she loves. She writes the small happy record of one more good day, with no shadow on it, only the plain contentment of a woman who is exactly where she most wishes to be. Then she closes the book and turns down the lamp, and the last light goes out, and there is only the dark and the soft sounds of the hull, and the deep breathing of a sleeping family, carried safe upon the still black water of a Highland loch, with the hills keeping their long silence around them, and the watch keeping the ship, and the dark keeping all of them, gently, until the morning of the last day. The night over the last loch is the deepest and stillest of the whole voyage. Listen, in the dark, for the steamer at anchor is never quite silent, and her small sounds are the lullaby of everyone aboard. There is the soft, endless wash of the sea against the hull, less a sound than a presence. There is the creak and small groan of the timbers as she works gently against herself. There is, now and again, the deeper groan of the cable taking the strain as she swings to a new lie, and the faint shiver that runs through the hull. Somewhere above comes the soft tread of the watch on deck, and the muffled striking of the bell marking the half-hours of the night, and under all of it the great silence of the loch and the hills, into which every faint sound falls and is swallowed, so that they only deepen the quiet rather than break it. Out beyond the hull the shore keeps its own watch, the cottage fire long out, the crofters asleep, the tide creeping back up over the smooth stones too softly to hear, the deer come down to graze the lower ground in the safe dark hours, an owl hunting on silent wings along the birch wood, and far up on the high tops only the cold, and the wind that never quite dies, and the wheeling stars. The whole country lies sleeping around the one small anchored ship, and the craft lies sleeping in the midst of it, held safe until the morning. And then the dawn of the last day comes, early and soft over the eastern hills, and there is a particular gladness in this waking, for it is the morning of arrival. The sky pales and warms, the stars go out, the mist lifts off the loch in white wreaths that the first sun burns away, the hills green and brighten, the birds begin. The ship wakes room by room, the children first always, full of the knowledge that today is the day they land, and a household, then the family. The morning watch holystones the decks and polishes the brass for the last time of the passage. The smoke rises again from the funnels. The smell of breakfast drifts up from the galley. And there is, all through the vessel, a lightness, an anticipation, the particular happy bustle of the last morning of a journey, when the end is in sight and the heart runs ahead to the welcome waiting. While the ship makes ready to weigh, let us go down, just once, into the parts of her we have not yet seen, into the working heart of her, where the power that has carried us north is made. Deep in her belly lies the engine room, and it is another world entirely from the carpeted rooms aft, a world of iron and heat and motion, of gleaming machinery, and the roar of the furnaces and the hiss of steam. Here the stokers labour, half naked and streaming with sweat, black to the elbow with coal dust, feeding the hungry fires shovelful by shovelful, watching the needles of the gauges, keeping the steam at its mark. Here the massive paddle engines turn, their massive connecting rods rising and falling, their cranks sweeping round, driving the long shafts out to the wheels on either side. the whole space alive with the controlled violence of the power that drives the yacht. It is hard, hot, dangerous, faithful work, done out of sight and out of mind of the family far above, and it is the hidden engine of the whole serene passage, for the calm of the decks and the peace of the cabins rest, in the end, upon the labour of the men in the heat below. And there is the navigation of her too, a quieter science but no less vital, for the safe passage of a great ship up such a coast demands a constant unsleeping skill. On the bridge the officers keep their watch, conning the steamer, reading the water and the marks and the chart. At noon they take the sun with their sextants and work out the ship's position. Through the night they steer by compass and by the stars and by the lights on the headlands. In the narrow waters of the islands they pick their way by eye and by the lead and by long knowledge of the coast. The charts themselves are a marvel, the accumulated knowledge of generations of surveyors, every rock and shoal and depth set down, and the reading of them, the laying off of courses, the constant watchful awareness of where the ship is and where the dangers lie, is the art on which every life aboard depends. The family sleeps easy and idle through it all, never thinking of it, and that they can do so is the whole achievement of the officers and men who never stop thinking of it, by day and by night, the whole passage through. Spare a thought, too, for the men who work her, for the 240 officers and seamen of the Navy who have carried the family north, and whose lives aboard run so close to and so apart from the family they serve. Theirs is a hard and disciplined and ordered life, lived by the bell and the watch and the unbending custom of the service. They rise early and turn in late. They keep their watches through the night in all weathers, that they holystone the decks on their knees in the grey dawn. They go aloft when the sails are needed. They pull the boats, that they keep the brass and the paintwork and the rigging in the faultless order that the royal yacht demands. They eat their plain hearty rations at the long mess tables. They sleep packed close in their swinging hammocks. They have their own songs and their own jokes and their own fierce pride in her. To serve aboard the sovereign's own vessel is a fine thing in a sailor's life, a mark of trust and a source of standing among his fellows ever after, and the men know it, and they give the vessel and the family the very best of their skill and their care. They are seldom seen by the family and seldom thought of, but they are everywhere about them, the strong, quiet, competent foundation on which the whole serene voyage rests. And the ship herself is younger than you might suppose, with a small history folded into her timbers. There had been an earlier ship of the same name, a smaller craft, the first to carry the Queen and the Prince on their early voyages, but she had proved in time too small and too slow for a sovereign and a family, and a household that only grew with every passing year. And so a second yacht had been ordered and laid down and built, larger, faster, grander, the very ship that carries us now, launched only a year or two before this voyage, from one of the royal dockyards of the West Country. She was built as the finest ships of her day were built, of good oak laid over a frame of the same, her hull rising slowly upon the stocks over many months under the hands of the shipwrights, the Edsea and the maul, and the auger ringing across the yard from the first grey light of morning. She was designed from the keel up for one purpose alone, to carry the sovereign in a state and a comfort and a safety befitting the dignity of the crown, and no expense and no care and no steamer was spared in the raising of her. The finest cabinet makers in the kingdom fitted her royal apartments. The best engineers of the age laid out her engines and her boilers. The most skilled riggers set up her masts and rove her miles of rigging. And when at last she was floated out and fitted and commissioned, She was, by the common consent of all who saw her, one of the handsomest vessels afloat anywhere on the waters of the world, a fit home upon the sea for the first family of the greatest empire the earth had yet known. Now the anchor is weighed for the last time of the voyage. The capstan is manned. The men walk round. The cable coming home link by dripping link. The anchor breaks free of the bottom and rises to the cathead, and the wheels begin their steady beat, and the steamer gathers way, and slides out of the last loch and on toward the place where she will land them. The final approach is made slowly and with care, for the landing of a queen is no small matter, and there is a quiet, ordered ceremony to it. The ship comes in toward the chosen anchorage or the pier. The wheels slow, the way comes off her, the boats are made ready or the gangway rigged. Word is passed quietly along the deck, and there is, all through the craft, the bustle of arrival, the baggage brought up from below, the household making ready, the carriages waiting on the shore, the small crowd that always gathers, even in the remotest place, to see the Queen come ashore. The sea part of the journey is ending. The ship has done her work. She has carried them safe, through fair weather and easy seas, the whole long way from the soft green south to the wild blue north, and now she gives them gently back to the land. And the landing itself, when it comes, has a quiet emotion to it that everyone aboard feels, though no one speaks of it. The Queen comes ashore in her barge, the picked crew pulling together in their single disciplined sweep, the oars rising and falling, the water creaming at the bow, or she walks down the gangway to the waiting carriages, the family about her, the household following, the baggage coming after. There are the small formalities of arrival, the officials waiting, the local gentry, the curious, respectful crowd. There is the captain, at the head of his officers, taking his leave of the family he has carried so faithfully. There is the vessel, lying off, that has been their home for these days, that they leave now with a small reluctance, for one grows fond of a ship that has carried one well. And then the carriages are mounted, and the horses lean into their collars, and the road home begins, the overland road through the hills to the valley of the Dee and the granite house that waits there. The voyage is over, but the journey is not quite done. The road home runs overland through the hills, and it is a journey of its own, gentler than the sea, but no less lovely. The carriages roll up from the coast and into the interior, climbing through the glens, following the rivers, winding among the high hills that rise on every side. The country opens out before them, the high moors purple with the coming heather, the dark pine woods, the rushing burns, the lochs lying still and silver among the hills, the occasional croft with its strip of cultivation and its peat smoke, the long empty miles where there is nothing at all but the hills and the sky and the road. The light plays over it all, the changing northern light, sun and shadow chasing each other across the slopes. The children watch from the carriage windows, pointing at the deer on the high ground, at an eagle turning over a ridge, at a waterfall white against the dark rock. The prince knows the country now, after these years of coming, and names the hills and the rivers as they pass. The Queen drinks it in, the wild beauty of it, the freedom, the sense of coming home to a place that is hers in a way that none of her grander possessions are, and at the end of the road, in the valley of the Dee, the house is waiting. Balmoral rises from among its trees, the granite still pale and new, the castle barely a year finished, the turrets and the crow-stepped gables sharp against the hills and the grounds about it still raw where the gardens are being made. And the family comes to it, with the particular joy of returning to a beloved place after an absence. There is the welcome of the household that has gone ahead and made all ready. There are the fires lit in the rooms against the cool of the Highland evening. There are the dogs bounding and delighted. There is the river running below, and the hills rising all around, and the deer on the high ground, and the whole long Highland summer stretching ahead. The prince is eager to see what has been done in his absence, full of plans for what shall be done next. The children scatter to their favourite places. The queen settles with a deep contentment into the home she loves best in the world. The voyage that began on a hazy morning on the south coast has brought them at last to the granite house among the hills, and the summer waiting, and the family whole and happy in the place that is theirs. Consider what the yacht had meant, in the end, that carried them so faithfully north. She had meant more than mere transport, more than a comfortable way to cover the distance. She had meant a few days out of the world, a few days when the weight of the crown was set aside, and the family could simply be a family, idle and happy, with nothing pressing to do but watch the sea and the islands slide by. She had meant safety, and comfort, and privacy, the three things hardest of all for a sovereign to come by. She had meant the open air and the changing light and the long unfolding of the loveliest coast in Britain. And she had meant, above all, the journey toward home, the steady, purposeful movement north, day after day, toward the hills and the house and the summer that they loved, so that the voyage itself, for all its own pleasures, was always lit by the gladness of where it was going. The ship would carry them south again at the summer's end, of course back to the world and the work and the weight of it. But that was months away, and not to be thought of now. Now there was only the arrival, and the house, and the summer, and the family whole and happy in the north. And we who have travelled with them have seen a great deal in these days at sea. We have stood on the deck as the land fell away in the morning haze, and had felt the first loss of the shore. We have gone below into the warm panelled rooms, and seen the mahogany glow and the silver shine. We have watched the family at their dinner, and heard the easy talk and the laughter. We have heard the music carry out over the dark water in the quiet anchorages. We have stood at the rail under the blazing northern stars, and felt the vast silence of the hills come down. We have rounded the Mull in the long ocean swell, and threaded the summer islands in the changing light. We have lain at anchor in the deep peace of the sea lochs, and woken to the misted dawns. We have come with them all the long way from the soft south to the wild north, and seen them safely landed and safely home. It has been a voyage inside a vanished world, a real voyage. This, pieced together with care from the letters and the journals and the records that those long-vanished people left behind, an honest and a loving reconstruction of how such a passage truly was, and truly felt, for the people who made it. And now, like them, it is time for you to let the voyage go, and to sleep. The steamer has done her work. She has carried them up the whole long edge of the country, through the fair days and the quiet nights, round the headlands and through the islands and into the sheltered lochs, and landed them safe, and given them back to the hills they loved. And there is nothing left now to be done, nothing to watch for, nothing to keep you. So let the vessel sail on through your sleep. Let her carry you the way she carried them borne along, safe and warm, with no effort of your own, through the dark and toward the morning. Let the beat of the wheels become the beat of your own quiet heart, slowing toward rest. Let the wash of the sea against the hull become the sound of your own breath, easy and deep. Let the gentle lift and fall of the ship upon the swell rock you, as it rocked them down and down into sleep. There is no more coast to watch tonight, no more islands to pass, no more anchorages to make. There is only the dark sea, and the steady vessel, and the long road north unrolling behind her, and the hills waiting somewhere ahead in the dark. The family is asleep in their cabins. The watch keeps the deck, that the lamps are out. The ship goes on, and you may go with her, down into the warm dark, carried and safe, asked for nothing, holding nothing, letting the whole of the day you have lived slide away astern like a coast sinking into the haze, until there is only the sea, and the yacht, and the night, and sleep. If these journeys into other times and places are something you would like to find your way back to again, you would be very welcome to come along, and there will always be another one waiting here for you whenever you have need of it. But that is the very last thing I will ask of you tonight. The ship is sailing on, the night is fair, the sea is kind, and there is nothing left for you to do but rest, and let yourself be carried down through the quiet dark toward the morning. Sleep well, stay warm, be kind to the people in your house, and I will see you in the next one. Good night.